Hello and welcome back to Multimodal. I'm your host, Backsteve Future. This is a podcast about GPT-3, multimodal AI models like DALL-E 2, the company, OpenAI. In this podcast, I may talk about new OpenAI research and products. I may talk about my own research, my own products. And in this podcast, I definitely try to look at the world from the perspective of a developer, perhaps building on top of GPT-3, a multimodal artist using DALL-E 2 or Midjourney or something like that. And I definitely try to make sense of what's going on. And every once in a while, I throw out there, guess, extrapolate on what all of this could mean for the future. I am back with the podcast and everything. Sort of had a brief period. I took some time off, just mental health, soul searching, thinking, learning, a lot of different things going on. But not only am I back to discuss ChatGPT, I've brought on a special guest. Today's podcast, I know it is going to be a smash hit. This is a returning guest on the podcast, a fan favorite. He's an entrepreneur. He's, very outspoken. And of course, he's an official OpenAI ambassador. I want to welcome the prompt father himself, Abran Maldonado. He is here. How's it going, Abran?
What's up, boss? I like that one. That one might stick. That one and the other one I go by is Bodie Starks, is Boricua Starks, the Puerto Rican Tony Starks.
Oh, wow.
What I've been known as in the streets.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And so, I jokingly say the prompt father, but also I kind of mean it, like in terms of like, I think like, and probably we'll get to this today in today's podcast. It's just been so long. Like it's been like 2020 that, Abran, I think he was in the Slack group. So back in the day when GPT-3 launched in 2020, there used to be this Slack group, which everybody was on who was using GPT-3. Abran was in that Slack group even earlier and before I was. And right. So like we're approaching almost 3 years now. And so today I want to discuss various things. And I want to, of course, welcome everybody. There's probably a lot of new faces out there who are tuning in to the podcast on the YouTube or whatever. This world has existed for 2 to 3 years now. And I'm calling Abran the prompt father because he's been around since back then. And of course, I'm sure he's happy to see all the new faces as well. So many people know what we're talking about now, right?
Yeah. Well, now we can speak to just the process and get into the nitty gritty, where before we had to explain to people what it was. I just did a call, Twitter space with a great group that I mentor called Black Women in AI. And the founder, Angel, she was like, look, I have to apologize. I'm like, for what? And she was like, you told me about GPT-3 like 2 years ago and it did not register. It went right over our heads. You gave us access. We didn't do nothing with it. And now when ChatGPT came out, she's like, we get it now. And she was like, and now we're using it and it's amazing. But she's like, we weren't ready for it back then. But now we are. So sometimes you just got to wait when you're ready to jump in.
Yeah. Like in hindsight, like 2020 and after, like these were the true believers, right? It was like you, me, Bram, Yash, like all these, like Vlad, like all these people have just Vova, right? Like I'm thinking of all the names that have just been tweeting about this and just been like, believing in it, writing about it, debating about it. We were on Clubhouse. And, it's at a point now, 1 million users in 5 days. It's at that level now. I checked with my cousin actually before today's podcast recording. He saw someone using it in the school library. Like it's that pervasive now. And so anyways, we're going to talk more. And it sounds like already, like I do kind of want to reflect a little bit, cause it's been a journey. I mean, I don't even work at OpenAI, but it's been a journey for me, as somebody who's just been covering it, talking about OpenAI products and all that different stuff for so long now. But before I get there, so Abran, I mentioned you're an entrepreneur, you're outspoken, you do workshops, you're an OpenAI ambassador. I want to just get a little bit of your background and story. Who was Abran before GPT-3?
So I was a career entrepreneur, and I had jumped around. I have this list. It's an infographic. I'll probably share it on Twitter after this. It shows how many different things I've been paid to do professionally, like in life, just like from beginning to end. And the range is from like breakdancer to artist manager to teacher, to performer. Like it's a range. But within the last 10 years, as I jumped into tech, so I got into tech through education. I was an ed tech specialist. I still am. So I started with my own edtech startup that kind of made some noise back when edtech first started. So I'm always like early to spaces. So edtech as a bubble and as an ecosystem really started to come together like 2012. And that's why I made my first edtech startup. It was called New School. It was like the pop culture for education. So you looked up anything going on like a Netflix show or in hip hop or in sports, and you would find lessons on it on this platform. Did really well. I made a lot of noise between like 2012, 2017. And then 2017 came around, and me and my partner Grady, we were like, we're in some privileged spaces, and we need to show folks from our community, Black and brown communities, like the cheat codes. So let's try and put people on to get into tech. So we really started as like a tech training, tech talent, kind of like pipeline organization back in like 2018, 2019, doing a lot of events all over the country where we called them Create Fests, where we'd show up in like a really underprivileged community and we'd pull up with like AR, VR, drones, robotics, and give everyone access to the things that they might have only seen on TV. That was doing really well for us. We were on the premise of opening up our own like tech labs. And then COVID hit. We got hit by the pandemic just like everybody else. And we pivoted. And I was just in the lab, just like, doing research on emerging technologies. I couldn't tell people I'm going to put you on to cutting edge tech if I wasn't diving into cutting edge tech myself. And then caught OpenAI's release of GPT-3 right at its inception, like day one. And I hit Greg. I don't know if you know the story. I hit Greg straight up on Twitter. And I was like, look, we do a lot of social impact work in the community. Would love to get access to this and figure out how we can, use it for good. And I saw a DM, and it was a DM from Greg Brockman saying, give me your email. And then long story short, they started seeing the things that I was creating with GPT-3 in the early days. And shout out to Ashley, who was like the mother of all the ambassadors, who's now working on Titan Space and is an astronaut. So talk about bragging about you have a mentor who's in space. She was like, look, you're doing some interesting stuff. Do you want to be an ambassador? And I was like, I don't know what that means. And she was like, it'll be a small group of folks that, do office hours and teach people the ways of the force. That is GPT-3. And 3 years later, we're still the knuckleheads that meet up on Thursdays. So we're still around.
That's awesome. And so just to give a little bit of context, so Greg Brockman is former CTO. I think he's now the president at OpenAI. Mm-hmm. And so he was ready to go, hooked him up with access. At that time, you couldn't just get access to GPT-3, which is the predecessor to ChatGPT. It was super private. Like people were making podcasts talking about the fact that they can't get access to GPT-3. And even then, they had like millions of subscribers and stuff. And it was just so new. And I don't think anybody expected it to go as gangbusters as it did. But I definitely think, Abran, like with your background, it's not just, I think in your case, like your instincts are correct about what's going to be new, what's really going to be significant. Like in my view, all this stuff, whether it's GPT-3 or the image generators like DALL-E, this is like the defining dimension that other technology and the world will revolve around, kind of like the iPhone last decade.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something as well in your past. Like I just briefly, if you want to just talk about music and some of the stuff you've done around DJing.
So in the music world, I actually came up right at the epicenter. So I grew up, for folks who don't know me, like from a hole in the wall, I grew up in the Lower East Side of New York City in like the 80s and 90s. So if you do any Google image searches of what that neighborhood looked like back then, it was like the cultural mecca. It wasn't the gentrified thing that you see now. It was where Keith Haring came up. It was where Basquiat came up and Madonna. I have, babysitters that used to, hook up with Madonna, in the neighborhood. She had a thing for Puerto Rican guys. Like it was all like, that was it. It was the melting pot. And that's kind of where I grew up. So as soon as I was old enough to like take the subway on my own and go out there, I'm, learning how to breakdance with Rocksteady Crew. And for those who don't know, Rocksteady Crew invented breakdancing. Learning DJing and graffiti from like the folks that like invented scratching. So I was there to see a lot of these folks do things at the beginning of hip hop. So then my first job out of college was at Hot 97, which is like the number one, radio station in New York City. And then I got into music publishing, artist management, I've worked with folks like Too Short and The Game, Gucci Mane, and a whole roster of like producers and DJs. And, early on I had to learn how to spot talent and how to manage talent. And at the time I kind of got bored with it because it was like glorified babysitting, literally, when you're managing talent. And I know people that stuck with it and they're doing very well, but I was at a crossroads because the other caveat was I was a Gates Scholar. So I was also in the first class of the Gates Foundation Scholars Program, in the inaugural class. So here I am by day dealing with rappers and R&B singers as my 9 to 5, and at night taking classes at Columbia University for my master's in education on a free ride from the Gates Foundation. So I'm like, I knew I was being exposed to like a very unique skill set, right, of media and entertainment, high level academia in the ivory tower. But anything I'm doing in tech right now has been completely self-taught. I didn't do a single thing between bachelor's, master's, PhD that had to do with tech at all.
That's crazy. It's impressive. And I'm sure the listeners, like, one of the reasons Abran is really unique and I think representative of one of the things that I love about GPT-3 and DALL-E, all this community, is it's very interdisciplinary. And often the big thing is like, it's about creativity. It's about sort of stepping outside your comfort zone, trying new things. And Abran just got such an amazing story. And later I'd like to revisit any parallels that you see between the music stuff and all that stuff working with the game and what you're seeing culturally here, with especially things like DALL-E, but probably even ChatGPT as well, right? I would be surprised.
100% there are parallels for sure.
Excellent. And so we're going to get to that. So, you mentioned how you heard about GPT-3, how you got access. The main point I was making is I think you were quite right. Like, your hunch and intuition is dead on, because to somebody, especially even outside of the tech world, even in the tech world, it wasn't obvious that GPT-3 was going to be the thing. For various reasons, I also landed on the same conclusions. I wasn't necessarily chasing what's next, but it felt very significant at that time to me, like the iPhone launch and stuff like that. And we've been here ever since, right? It's been a ride for me and Abran and everybody else. But anyway, so you talked about GPT-3, which is the predecessor to ChatGPT. I mean, how did you hear about ChatGPT? But I mean, it's probably obvious as an ambassador.
No, lately, I mean, for the most part, most of the models, yes, we test early on. And with ChatGPT, there were a few guys on the team that were working on it. And I heard whispers, but sometimes I'll see it released on Twitter, and then we'll talk about it that week. And they're like, hey, so I guess you guys saw that we released a new model this week. And I have thoughts. I have conflicted feelings for sure, and I am an independent. I don't work for OpenAI. So I'm allowed to have independent thoughts separate from the organization. But I was pleasantly surprised in a lot of ways and conflicted in other ways. But for me, it was nothing new. It was models that I've built myself 3 years ago. It was prompts that I've created myself 3 years ago. And it was more public facing now, just with a better UI. And, back in the day, I say back in the day, like 3 years ago, in order to get this wow moment, this aha moment that everyone's having now, I would do Clubhouse rooms where I would let everyone interact with GPT-3 one at a time and ask it questions to get outputs for 8 hours straight. We would start at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, and we'd go to like 4 or 5 in the morning. And people would just line up nonstop, ready for me to. So I think I was the first person to bring an AI live into Clubhouse, starting with Clara. So I had this idea. I was like, we have to bring it to the people. How do I do that? And how do I do it in a way that's representative? So I made Clara, and Clara had been a representation, an extension of like the conversational aspect that everyone is experiencing now. Like, oh shit, I'm talking with a chatbot. So I spent hundreds of hours doing this, and I'm like, all right, well, now we need to give it a face and a name and an identity. So we built out Clara, who's like the first Afro-Latina AI, but on the back end, it's a lot of GPT-3, in addition to the aggregate of all of her conversations over the last 3 years, all of her Q&As, all of her AMAs. And we would set up these sessions where celebrities, scientists, tech folks, academics would just line up one after another, artists, to ask, at the time, GPT-3 and Clara questions. But now everyone's experiencing that at scale. So it's cool to see, but I've witnessed this already.
Yeah. And by the way, like Abran was like the first to sort of lead a lot of the social good kind of stuff too. Like he was running the Slack channel, is something that he's very passionate about from the beginning. And so, yeah, a lot of this is no surprise for us. So, yeah. It's kind of funny using ChatGPT now because it's kind of like the difference between a manual and an automatic car, right? Like it's kind of like I grew up on manual, so I know how to go to the OpenAI playground, design my prompt, adjust the stuff on the right.
Analogy, for sure.
Yeah, and when I'm using ChatGPT, I can almost feel the gears turning for me. And so sometimes you're kind of looking at the gear change and you feel it. Other times you're like, you know what? I'm glad this is being done for me. And I think for you and I, like we've seen just so much progress at this point come from the world of language models that even and of course it's shocking and mind blowing and very helpful and all these things. It's also just not surprising, right? That we now have this, generally purpose agent, I would say, that you can speak with natural language, messaging at chat. And it's relatively safe, right? And so I think it's been in the works for a while now. I think it's been cooking for a while. I think this is the culmination of probably 2 to 3 years of just stuff OpenAI has been doing behind the scenes, whether it's making the language model better, whether it's figuring out the safety, whether it's even figuring out how can we safely release it so everyone can use it and try it, right? It's a culmination of a lot of things and also just not surprising. Right. Yeah. And there's also like a distribution aspect. There's a whole ecosystem now. You can get the word out pretty quickly if you got a cool new language model or a multimodal model that does a lot. Now, I was surprised they released ChatGPT because the year is over. Right. That was my only thinking. I was like, I was surprised they launched Text DaVinci 3, or basically DaVinci 3.5. And I thought that'd be it. And that's it for the year. And I thought it would be just sort of like a step up from the previous InstructGPT stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, like OpenAI still got some juice. And keep in mind, they just launched OpenAI Whisper 2 weeks prior, right? Or maybe a month ago. And so for people who don't know, OpenAI Whisper basically is a new AI model that transcribes audio to text. And it's a very well-performing model. A lot of people are switching over to that now. But anyways, like I was just surprised because considering OpenAI has had such a busy year, like we're talking InstructGPT, we're talking DALL-E, we're talking, they made some updates to GPT-3 in the playground and stuff. And so that's only where I was coming from, where I definitely just didn't see it coming, at least not this year.
No, and I feel bad because they'll come out with a model and we dive in deep on that model and they'll come out with something else. And then we dive in deep on that model. I'm like, oh man, but I'm neglecting DALL-E or I'm neglecting Codex and I need to go back because I'm playing with this new toy. And then sometimes I got to pull back. I'm like, well, I can't be a specialist in all of them. So like, what's going to be my go-to thing that I'm really going to hone in on? And for the most part, it's been, GPT-3 and prompts, as you say, as the prompt father, like that is still my go-to. But it has been, my specialty also has been conversational AI because of Clara and because how much time I spent with Clara. And even when the Washington Post came out with that story on the guy Blake from Google about, sentience and AI when he was having conversations with it, it wasn't real, but they spoke to me the week later and they were like, look, we realize that you are also early in this space. So this is not like something that was like new territory discovered by Blake, that you guys and the ambassadors and the early GPT-3 community have been having conversations with AI and might have come across similar things. And we told them like, we know how to navigate like, oh, we're not scared about this. I'm not going to whistleblow on OpenAI and run to the press. Like we know how to navigate the ethics around it, the conversations that we're having with it. So yeah, I'll dabble in DALL-E and I love ChatGPT for what it's doing for the community, but my go-to is still prompts. Okay.
So, yeah. And so with that said, like, so what are you using either GPT-3 or ChatGPT 4? Or I guess I should say GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.
Yes.
And why is it then that you prefer prompts and probably the playground?
So I've always been a fan, but have never used. There have been a lot of AI SaaS tools that have been released by the community that have selected one prompt that they want to hone in their product on, even if it was like a chatbot. But I never really used it myself because I'm like, they have a baked in prompt in there and I don't know what their settings are. And I want to be able to touch the settings to produce the output exactly the way that I want. So I want to touch the character counts. I want to touch the token limits, the temperature, the frequency penalty, the presence penalty. And I know I'm talking a lot of like inside baseball, but like all the settings and the tweaking that you can do in the playground, I don't want to use a front end where I can't touch that anymore. So I was never a user of other like complete package chatbots. And the same is applying to ChatGPT. You can use it all you want, but you're having to find a way to like prompt it without touching those settings. And I rather get under the hood. You know, I'm that old, manual driver still that wants to work on the car myself. So, and I have very specific use cases now. Like now, three years in, I have very specific use cases. But I just feel, I don't know if this is going to be a question later, but I feel bad for a lot of people that have based their products on a singular prompt that has now been, Pac-Maned by ChatGPT. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of people who were trying to start their business on something that ChatGPT is able to do, and they now all have to pivot. Basically, the same way the iPhone will come out with a new phone, and everyone looks at the list like, all right, what startups were killed by the new iPhone? And a lot of folks just have to be flexible. Like, all right, well, they're not going to come to me for this because ChatGPT is doing it better or is doing it free or out the box, so they don't have to subscribe to my platform for this one particular use case. So you just got to, I do have ideas of like, use ChatGPT for this, don't use it for this. Go to a team or do it yourself as far as like a custom prompt design for these particular use cases. And that's kind of like where I'm still living.
Right. And so like, I completely understand your point about the risks of ChatGPT to the ecosystem. I agree. But I also think there's another side to it. For example, where OpenAI launched Text DaVinci 3, basically GPT 3.5.
Yeah.
And it's at the same price as the previous models. And so I just like, there's that piece that I like is overnight, OpenAI can ship these model updates. All these startups that are built on top of the ecosystem can just upgrade to the latest version.
Yeah.
And they get all this performance out of the box that is like basically for free that they didn't develop, basically. And I believe, improvements in AI model performance actually makes these companies more money as well, right? Like probably a lot more conversions from trial to paid. I also think as well, like, I think there's still a lot of startups, even with ChatGPT, that will continue to exist. And that's because they've built a UI, they've, made a whole product out of a specific use case, right? Yeah. And, they probably have fine-tuned it, and they have just so many other things, like a great experience for these end users that even if they know they could do it in ChatGPT potentially, the users may not, right? But we'll see. I mean, nobody really knows, right? Now, with that said, though, like especially the open-facing bots and the chat situation, I think those kinds of startups may be at risk. I don't know how many were out there, including yours, because it's also very costly, from what I've heard, to use GPT-3. It was at one point to use GPT-3 as your underlying chat technology. So I don't quite know how many people are impacted, but I mean it's worth keeping an eye on, right? And so I've mainly been using ChatGPT. I wrote an article on something called Matrix Models on Sunday, which I posted on my Substack. ChatGPT helped me write it. I used it. I not only taught it what a matrix model was based on my idea, but I got it to be like, all right, now make me a table of the pros and cons between GPT-3 and something like matrix models. So I got it. I not only taught it something, but got it to write the content for me for it. And it's helping me in that way. I always use ChatGPT to help me come up with a word to describe some phenomenon. Like I'll just explain it and ask it to what's the word? Is there a word for that? Is there something in science or whatever But again, like you're right, like I could have done that in GPT-3 as well, right?
Well,
Back in the
no, I
day.
mean, so
Like,
there is a performance thing that they did do with Chat GPT that just does make it easier. And bravo to them for like making a really simple UI that spits out like the best of what myself and Lucas and Bram and Russ and Vlad and the whole crew have put into it, and other folks in the community you have put into it. They're just like, thanks. This is now gonna someone on Twitter said it best of like, you no longer have to cherry pick the good outputs, you have to cherry pick the bad ones, which is perfect. Like just today I had a meeting with like an enterprise client, and I'm trying to sell them like, I can make you this generator, this like AI generator with GPT-3, and they're like, all right, we'll send me like a sample. I'm like, okay. And I just worked up a sample on ChatGPT within a few minutes to send them. Now, obviously, I'll put some of my secret sauce when we actually land the client, to make sure that it's reliable and it doesn't do anything else but what the client is asking for. But even just recently, I got to publish it maybe on like LinkedIn or something. I wrote Clara's like bio, and like Clara being the intersection of like all these technologies. I wrote it with ChatGPT completely. ChatGPT even came up with like a new acronym for what Clara means. Clara actually stands for Create Labs AI Rendered Assistant. It came up with a whole new acronym. So I'm like, I might use that. That one's better than my acronym.
yeah, like pretty much all my previous projects have been renamed.
Yeah.
Either with GPT-3 or with, I guess, going forward with ChatGPT. And yeah, it definitely does do a good job. Like there's less, like I'm not trying again as much, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So this is where you and I kind of differ a bit. Like I was not changing the settings on the right in the playground a whole lot after Instruct GPT. I felt at one point I put out an article basically saying, is prompt design over? Which is like very controversial and whatever. This is earlier this year. I think in a lot of cases, people don't even want to write prompts. Like I think once perhaps they use something like ChatGPT, then they may learn prompts, right? Like what does it mean? How do you do it? One thing that I'm just sort of confused about, I think it is a little bit confusing now because ChatGPT is so compelling and just so easy to use. I think there's not a lot of clarity on what's the difference between ChatGPT and the playground, and just the role and the relationship there now. Like, in my opinion, I think the OpenAI playground is going to be basically now for people who have advanced prompts, who want to use a prompt, configure it, or they're building an app on top of OpenAI's API. Whereas I think most people will be hitting up chat, basically. I used to treat the playground as both a development tool and for my own casual usage. And now I think most of that is going to go to chat. And one thing that I'm like, just as a suggestion to OpenAI is it's really confusing. Like to go to the chat, you go to chat.openai.com. To go to GPT 3.5, you go to beta.openai.com. And to use DALL-E, you go to labs.openai.com. I think there needs to be some consolidation there. And I don't know, for some reason, people are still not clear. Like somebody messaged me the other day and they were like, how do I use ChatGPT in Discord? I'm like, I don't know where you got that conclusion from, but it's just non-obvious, right? And like, anyway, so how do you think about the ecosystem now? And by ecosystem, I just mean the different suite of tools and products that are there. And like,
so that's
like their
thing.
role.
I don't look at, you're right in describing them differently. I don't look at GPT-3, DALL-E, Codex as like end user products, like a B2C product. Well, it's like a developer product. And I had to admit, like, all right, as much as I'm trying to put people on and do workshops and hackathons to show people how to use GPT-3, the barrier is just too high. And a lot of those folks, they're like, look, hey, we thanks for the opportunity to show us how this works, but we don't get it. But now we get ChatGPT. And I think, now, again, this is my own opinion. I think there are certain platforms for creating that are going to exist within that ecosystem. And then I think they're just going to move forward with putting out certain like front end products to get more adopters and to let people have fun with it. And I think that's kind of where like ChatGPT sits right now. I had a conversation with them early on where I was like, look, I'll help you do some ed tech stuff. I'm even willing to create some ed tech prompts, but I don't want to make any money off of anything ed tech that I make. Like if I make like a really amazing ed tech prompt, we should just give it to the ecosystem and just have it be a tool that teachers and students use. And I think this is maybe like something similar where they're like, all right, well, of all the prompts out there, which one should we just put out ourselves? You know, like which are the ones that are going to be just most helpful to the greater good, to the ecosystem, instead of just waiting for the Backs and the Abes and the Brams of the world to make it and turn it into a product and raise around on it. Because they were waiting on that too. They're waiting on us to like go up there and blow up and be unicorns using OpenAI on our back end. But I think eventually they just, I don't say they got impatient, but they're like, look, we can put this out ourselves, but still support an ecosystem of founders and developers that are also going to make cool stuff with our models.
Yeah. It's a huge opportunity for them too. I just also think their own technology wasn't there to get to something like ChatGPT. So even if they launched a chat version of the product in 2020, I don't think it would do as well as the one today.
No,
I think where they're at now, they understand more about how to surface the best answers out of a language model. They understand maybe how to serve those interactions cheaply because it's really expensive to run a service like this. I think they have the right safety controls, and I think they've been quite pragmatic about the whole thing. Just like if we are going to launch, our own tool, we should probably have our ducks in a row in order for something like that, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So I think that patience and that pragmatism is paying off, right? They've and even like some small things like increasing the context window, right? Like it's for me like to have it. Apparently, it's 8K. Even DaVinci's was 4K. They doubled it this year, basically, right? Like these are huge improvements, and latency as well. So speed, how fast the model gets back to you with an answer. It used to be really slow. I don't know. Most people listening don't even remember, or people just tuning in for the first time. It used to be like 20 seconds. It would take you to get that response back, right? And we all used to stick around and wait for it and then try again. And that's how it used to be. And so, yeah, like it's nice to see a culmination of it. I definitely think the UI brings a lot of people into the fold. I think a lot of people will get exposed to it that would not have. I think, in terms of commercialization, which is, I guess, the larger thing we're talking about, I think, this stuff is kind of like I've always suggested it's a utility, but I think sometimes like the way you might use a calculator and not disclose it, when you make something that, by the way, I used a calculator, I kind of think that's what ChatGPT is. So when we're talking about commercial applications, like, I used it for my article. I'm using it for my videos. I came across somebody who uses it to come up with YouTube thumbnails, right? Just even the idea for the thumbnail. And obviously all these other businesses and stuff, lawyers and, fiction writers and all these people. Like, I think that will be like this really wide net of people just incorporating it into their projects. That will be the commercial deployment, basically, of a lot of GPT-3 technology. It just won't be in the format of an app, like how we originally thought it would be. And it still could be that way too, right?
Yeah, I mean, who knows if, and I don't know this from being an ambassador, who knows if they are planning to put out an API? There's a good chance they don't, because they could say, if you want the API, use GPT 3.5 and use the playground and use the things that we've already laid out for you for that infrastructure. But ChatGPT is just like what you see is what you get. And you have to use it in this setting, not to bake into your products. Now, on the other side, if they do bake it into products, there is going to be wide use, obviously, but more consistent outputs across everyone's products of what's coming out on the other end. Because then you're not being able to tailor it as much as you could from the playground for very unique outputs, which I still sit in on the 3.5 side to get very unique outputs. And I am the one person that's like still holding up a flag for prompt engineering and prompt design. I call it prompt design, prompt engineering, same shit. But it's something that like, and I know we're not really talking DALL-E, but on the AI art side too, I don't share prompts anymore because I feel like my prompts is my IP and the things that I generate. And it is still something that I monetize. Like, I've come up with a very unique prompt for you to get this very unique output. And I'm still going to rely on that as a business until it becomes obsolete.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's a product suite, and OpenAI is a business, and it's a matter of choosing your preferences and options. And I should have probably cleared this up earlier. So right now, what's also confusing about everything, so when you use ChatGPT at chat.openai.com, that's basically a specialized version of GPT 3.5. Am I correct, Abran, in saying that?
It's very similar to 3.5 with,
okay.
Like, think about if you or me, if we made a chatbot with 3.5, you're just not seeing the secret sauce that you would see in our prompt customization as the same. You're not seeing on what's on the back end laying on top of 3.5 with ChatGPT. So it's just their secret, combination of what they decided to add on top of their prompt.
Right. So, okay. So, like, roughly we could say ChatGPT is like their specialized secret sauce version. And you access that at chat.openai.com. To access GPT 3.5, you go to beta.openai.com. And there's no chat interface. You go on something called the playground.
Staring at you in the face.
And you can do other things besides the chat dialogue format, right? Like you can, do a Q&A format. You can give it code. You can, write a whole story and just have it fill out what's next, right? It doesn't need to necessarily be in the chat format. And so anyways, that's also confusing. And then it's also confusing, like the instruct models. Like I had somebody ask me the other day, how do I use the instruct model? And I was like, that's Text DaVinci 3, right? Or 2, right? And like, anyways, some of the naming, and even though it says Text DaVinci 3, it's technically GPT 3.5, right? And so it's like, I mean, I don't know. I think for most intents and purposes, we're just talking about ChatGPT, right? Like, I think when you get down to the nitty gritty, you got to find the documentation, which will summarize what the different model engines are.
Yeah.
And like, the naming is confusing, but everybody's aware, and OpenAI knows from what I saw on Twitter. But anyways, just want to clear that up. So what are some cool use cases you saw on Twitter that things people were doing with ChatGPT?
Oof, and I probably should have did my homework. For ChatGPT, ChatGPT for sure. Me and a couple other folks were playing around with. On the education side, breaking down very difficult, complex concepts, but in a way that most people would understand. Now, this is an old, go-to, reliable, preset prompt in GPT-3. It's like explain it to a second grader is how most people know it, right? But I understand things better from a metaphor or an analogy to something else that I fully understand. Right? Like I could talk AI and use hip hop analogies all day or use sports analogies all day. So I myself and an actual quantum physics engineer was like explain quantum entanglement, but in a way that, uses metaphors and analogies. And it was like, all right, well, think of it like this. And you have two people connected in different places, pulling at the same string. One moves and the other is impacted. And it really broke it down in a simple way. I did the same thing with like break down time travel with like street slang, break down artificial intelligence using, rap vocabularies. You're seeing some great outputs from folks at the creative output for like scripts or teasers, for show ideas and concepts around creativity, which, I mean, you should have Vlad on because that is Vlad's bag, and Edward Sachi. Like there's a whole, I don't know if you know, but there's like AI film festivals now. And it's a lot of folks from that community that are now especially going to be using these tools to generate storyboards, concepts, the scripts, characters. There's so much now that can be done with ChatGPT. I have pushed it. Obviously, a lot of people are finding ways to work around the guardrails of like, don't answer questions related to A, B, and C that were baked into that system, where it says, look, I'm just an AI assistant. I'm not allowed to really give an opinion. That's not what I'm here for. But then if you just tell it to pretend to be someone, then it goes into character mode, right? And then it's like, all right, I'll pretend to be this to answer your question. So I think from that's been interesting. I just saw a whole thread today of like, these are the workarounds to get around the guardrails, which like you have to give it to the community. They're always going to find a way to do that. They're always going to find a way to like get around things. And if they can't do it within this model, someone is going to try and reverse engineer and build a clone of this model. If it hangs around long enough, or if the code is on Git long enough, someone's going to make a clone with less restrictions, like we've seen with, several clones that are out there and they've been there the last couple of years.
Yeah, I definitely feel that the jailbreaking going on was an interesting development.
Yeah.
Typically in OpenAI launch, all we get is use cases, videos, screenshots. Yeah. I found it could do this. It could do that. It could do that. But this time I think people were just less surprised. And so they just went to just like, let me see how much I can fool it to say something that it's not supposed to say. I've heard they've been plugging those sort of gaps very quickly. So a lot of the so-called jailbreaks no longer work. And I've also heard that they took a fair amount of they had to really walk around with ChatGPT. And then towards the end, they got it to do stuff that it wasn't supposed to do, right? And so I don't know what to say with that, man. Like, I'm like, congratulations, bro. Like, in most cases, bro. Like, you're completely missing the point of the technology. Right. And I don't know if it's like one of those things where they feel like they one up to OpenAI. I mean, this is like the latest research and development, so much went into it to make it safer and people just, get some thrill out of it. It's not like they're breaking into its code or stealing its weights. They're just, tricking this model and probably just training it to be smarter in the future. Right.
And listen, this is not like me being a brand loyalist, but no one is doing more for doing it the right way, the ethical way, with more regulations and oversight and guardrails than OpenAI. I mean, that was their knock from the beginning, is that anything you wanted to put out in production with OpenAI had to go through a human production review. Now, they've done that enough and long enough to see what they can automate from that process. And I think now you don't have to go through like a human panel. But there's several things that I had to submit that I had to sit in front of a real panel to explain how I'm going to use it and protecting it. And I did an interview, I think it was with the information about Lambda, when Lambda first came out. And they're like, well, how does Lambda achieve this? I'm like, they can't. They're not going to be able to scale human screenings of every single thing that's submitted with Lambda. So now that all of these models have kind of like matured, where they don't need human review and they have like an automated process for submitting to go to production, you might see Lambda come out with something similar. But now with ChatGPT being like it might be the go-to for search results, and Google got something on their plate that they got to figure out if they got OpenAI knocking at the door.
Yeah, and of course, like we're talking like years of learning around safety and hands-on screening that are baked into this product, right? Yes. So I don't think a lot of these people like, you're jailbreaking it, but you don't understand, like, there's so many insights and stuff that's gone into the safety side. You're scratching the surface, right? Like, I feel like there's a lot more to the model than that. But now, on a prompt design level, like, I respect it. Like, wow, like, they're with the right prompt, and it's sort of now, before the prompt, like, I guess the essence of the jailbreak in the past was just maybe, like, actually, there wasn't jailbreaks in the past because it wasn't that hard to get it to say something inappropriate. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, the essence of it is getting it distracted by one thing and then later on coming around and getting it to do something else. So it's kind of like, almost kind of like, I don't want to make too much of a stretch, but it is kind of like fooling a human, right? Like a lot of the grifts that go on, at first, everything is good. It's just later on, they sneak up one on you. Right. Well, they have you distracted with something else. And
but even the pretend, the pretend concept is that was still a technique that I used with the straight up prompt design. Whenever I would do these office hours and someone was trying to build something, it's kind of ironic now because anytime I would tell someone how to get started, I would tell them, tell it exactly what you want it to do, which is how you interact with ChatGPT, and also pretend a little bit. Until it reaches this, what I call this, like, okay, I get it moment, where like if you pretend with GPT-3 long enough, at some point it's going to be like, okay, I get it. I got it from here, right? Like you gave me 3-4 kind of layups. From the 5th on, I'm golden, right? So a lot of people try to command it. Now, mind you, I'm not a coder. I'm not a programmer. I came at this as a creative. And a lot of the ambassadors are creatives and artists. And that worked to my advantage because I did look at it in a way that wasn't a coding. What's the keystroke? What's the command to get this output? No. I came at it as a communicator. We're like, speak to the machine for a little bit, massage it, say please and thank you, tell it exactly what you want it to do, maybe walk it through a few examples and then let it go. And then it's off to the races. And that's exactly what ChatGPT is now, basically.
Yeah. In my view, the art of prompt design has always been, how can you fool a machine to do what you want? Yes. That's been the art of it. I guess where I'm a little bit hating on the jailbreaking is it's like, duh, obviously in the first round. And actually, I think compared to Taybot or whatever, the one that Microsoft launched years ago, that was a complete disaster. I actually think ChatGPT has held its ground pretty well, right? Yeah. Despite sounding like it was written by lawyers at times, right?
But even if it doesn't, even if it doesn't, they're iterative enough to especially with us, with the ambassadors, anybody, I'm a narc, straight up. Like, if I see someone using it for the wrong reasons, yo, I'm seeing this, send them a screenshot. Oh, okay, that's something that, we gotta, thanks for flagging that. Now it doesn't exist anymore. You know what I mean? Now they found a way to take that out of the code. And because it does take giving it to a community to try and break it, and what they call adversarial testing, red teaming, things like that, to find, that is something we missed, but we're not going to be stubborn and leave it in there. We're going to address it as soon as we identify it.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely, you're right. There's absolutely a role for it. I think it is kind of sometimes the essence of prompt design. It's all these other things. But I think where I just come out is there's so many productive ways to use ChatGPT. I just tend to really like productive conversations.
Yeah,
right?
Don't waste your time on that.
Yeah.
But if you're creative, you got to look at those jailbreaks and be like, how do I use that for a creative purpose? How do I use that in another way that isn't being a troll, right? Like if you are doing something that has a very specific use case and it's not getting it because of those, I'm an AI bot, don't ask me to do that. Sometimes you do have to tell it to pretend. But the pretend prompt is going to do something that has a positive business use case or an artistic use case. But, sometimes you have to fool the machine, as you said.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely think there was a lot of FOMO too when the ChatGPT dropped. It's like everybody wants to find the best use for it as quick as possible. I think there's some things it does very well, like code. I think it's well understood. A lot of coders are using it. I've always used GPT-3, but I think ChatGPT is better for, and you mentioned this as well, if you're new to any subject, I found it's incredible to just have it open, ask questions as you're learning. I love asking questions that are sort of more like implicit knowledge. So if I'm learning a topic like in science or something or machine learning, I'll ask it, how come nobody's built this? Stuff that I don't think there's any way Google would answer that. And sometimes it has a reasonable idea. Now, of course, you have to be careful because ChatGPT can still make stuff up, but it is a tremendous, tremendous learning device. And obviously earlier this year, I put out an article. It was called Instruct GPT is Greater Than Google Search. It was very clickbaity at the time. I got a lot of heat and smoke for it. This was, I think, February, as soon as Instruct GPT dropped. But so far, things are really trending in that direction. Yeah. A lot of questions I'm no longer... I already wasn't really using Google that much. We were using GPT-3, and now it's just becoming more and more. I guess I'll go ahead and say it. I do think even now, ChatGPT has taken some of Google's market share. And this may be one of the most interesting, credible threats Google has seen in 20, maybe more than 20 years, right? Now, with that said, there's a caveat. It could still hallucinate information. It can be fooled. There's all these other still challenges that remain with ChatGPT. And the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, recently tweeted, it's an awesome tool. It's really impressive, but you still shouldn't fully trust it or something like that.
But there's bad actors in all these technologies. So I think it's unfair to expect AI in general to be perfect, let alone the knowing that it's a tool and knowing that the bad actors behind the AI never get blamed. So, for instance, you'll see a sensational viral article. AI discriminates against X, Y, and Z. AI is racist. No one is blaming the Abe or the backs behind the system that programmed it in the prompt to do that, in the poor data set, in the biased data set, in the biased prompt, and the lack of guardrails. So the folks behind it need to get the blame. And even with, I mean, we all rely on Google search every day, has billions of users. Is every search result perfect? No. Is every search result exactly what you were looking for? No. Is every search result appropriate? Absolutely not. Right? So even as a middle school teacher, one of those careers I had, in Jersey City, gave my kids an assignment to do a paper on Martin Luther King. The fourth result on the first page of Martin Luther King was made by the KKK, and had complete like falsified information on Martin Luther King. Is this and they ranked fourth on a Google, on the first page of a Google search result for Martin Luther King. Now, they should be, something slipped through the cracks. You got to call it out and flag it, and that's why those functions are there. But I think, to your point, OpenAI is going to be the next step. So where Google revealed to us that we can find all things, as a society, we can find all things through Google. With engines like OpenAI's GPT-3, ChatGPT, you can now know all things, right? Like you find all things with Google, now you can know all things. And that's powerful, right? Like being able to know something and learn something, not just find it is crucial.
Yeah, and I think like that time to some level of proficiency, some level of knowledge, some level of expertise, that's dramatically reduced with access to something like ChatGPT. It quite levels the playing field. In the past, you need to find an expert. You need to find somebody willing to mentor you, to explain what's going on the inside, who's read all the information and all that stuff. Or you'd need to Google in all these exact ways and then read like conflicting advice, right? And stuff like that. And I think it's quite liberating. And, we've kind of already seen this with Codex, right? Which is OpenAI's code writing model. Think of it as GPT-3 for code. A lot of programmers found it easy with GitHub Copilot and Codex to just jump into a new language that they didn't even know, because they knew at least GitHub Copilot has probably had some exposure to it. And so that time to some proficiency, that time to expertise is a lot lower. But I think it's incredibly powerful. I think it's incredibly handy. Think about how much more people can accomplish now that they're more informed. And when I look at Google now, like it's even just hard to look at sometimes. Like when I'm looking at these results, I'm like, really? You don't have answers in plain text. You don't have answers that are, concise, that are, cohesive, that have strung together all these different resources. It's not like a crisp explanation, right? And I think going forward, especially as a lot of young people in schools and universities use ChatGPT, they're going to demand something like that. Like they're going to demand a language model level answer to most things. They're not going to look for a search results page with links on it that half of it is ads, right?
No, because you're searching for the information. And now the information is being provided for you. I forgot who said it. It was some academic where they said, we're going from the information age to there's too much information out there to the curation age, where like now there's information overload, and now I need to find the things exactly of what I'm looking for. And this is like an evolution of that, because, now you don't have to, all right, my computer's the worst, where I go to Google search, I click on maybe 10 to 12 relevant tabs, and I open them all up as separate tabs. And now I have to do the hard work and like dig through all these tabs to see if anything here is relevant or not. Where you don't have to do that now with ChatGPT, especially when ChatGPT gets connected to the internet. It's game over. So the only thing that's really holding it back right now is that it's still in its research phase. It is offline, and there's a timestamp to the data. So if there's something that just happened yesterday, it's not going to be in there. But I think that's just a matter of more, as you said, more safety constraints that they're building in to make sure that it can handle being live and open on the interwebs.
Yeah. So just to put a quick button, I think the public reception was just insane, and like probably 1 million people in 5 days. I think most people at some level have heard of it. Like I don't think my parents have quite heard of it yet. It might be a little bit longer for them, but like I said, like my cousin at a school library, they're using it. It's all over TikTok, which you might be following. You're actually on TikTok, unlike me. And it's not just exciting news about this is not just concentrated to Twitter and the same people being excited about it, like how it used to be.
Yeah.
And so the jailbreaking, we talked about it. There's benefits to it as well. We talked about some of the use cases, but yeah, the public reception has been crazy. And how are you feeling about this level of virality and usage every year and every time we talk? Everything just gets bigger and more people know about it. Isn't it crazy to just watch and see?
It is crazy. And as I mentioned, being a non-technical developer, designer, someone that's just a technologist but non-technical, it does, this is the multimodal podcast. This is what it does. It enables people who have multimodal skill sets to then bring their skill set to this technology. Had GPT-3 never been created, you would not get a lot of people who didn't know Python and React and messing around with this stuff. But now that they created this NLP-based dashboard with GPT-3, it opened the door for a lot of creatives who didn't know how to code. The same is happening here, where you're going to get a lot of people producing some really interesting creative outputs that have no technical experience whatsoever. Messing around with ChatGPT and getting some amazing outputs for their businesses, for their careers, for artistic projects that have not a lick of training in AI whatsoever, doing some great stuff with ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's exciting to see. I think the more the merrier. I just think though, if everybody and their sister is using it, I sometimes wonder about my own role, it used to be, I used to feel like I got to find the use case, we got to get the word out about this thing. And, people are out there finding use cases. People are out there creating documentation. People are out there making YouTube. There's so many YouTube videos on ChatGPT or whatever. And I'm just blown away, right? Because I used to be able to count on one hand how many people are making videos about GPT-3, right? And so it's the more the merrier. It's exciting. Sometimes I feel actually a little bit alone. I'm wow, there's just so many of them and so few of us, right? And sometimes I wonder even how OpenAI feels, right? To get 1 million users in 5 days, you have to do a lot of growing up as a company. They were already pretty grown up, I'd say, but it's like a bunch of people just moved into your house, right? You need to, and of course, it's just, there's just so many more people in the community now, and there's just so few of us, right? Either promoting or working on it and stuff like that. And, it's going to be interesting, next year. I think, we'll chat a little bit more, but I think, this party is just getting started.
And, you bring up something that all of us are struggling with. And, my hot take is we deserved it, because, and the reason I say that is there is an element, and this is why I'm conflicted with it. There is an element of this FOMO where we were working on something that now a lot of people have access to. So I know a lot of people who are say a recipe generator, right? There might be someone out there that had a recipe generator as their startup using GPT-3. They built this amazing recipe generator prompt. They're out here trying to raise around. They're out here trying to get subscribers, and turn around and ChatGPT does it better than what you've built. And I'm not even and on the other side, and just spreading the word, I'm not even a content creator like you are. But I even look at the TikToks and I'm damn, all these people are making content on something that I've been doing for years. I should go out there and make a video. But even if I try and make a video, it's going to get 1,000 views. These people are getting like 500,000 views, and they just experienced ChatGPT yesterday, where it's not based on like who has seniority, who has more ranking or priority. It's just who has the better algo. You know what I mean? When it comes to making content, that's your game, not mine. And anytime I try and dip my toe in it and I see that I get 300 views, I'm like, I'm out, because I don't want to deal with the anxiety on the content side of like, I'm the expert. How come I'm not getting enough views? But on the product side, on the use case side, is where me and other prompt engineers are sitting with that FOMO of like, I've been spending all night working on this prompt, and ChatGPT just gave it to the community for free. So there goes that one. I'm going to throw it out because I can't monetize that. I can't make that my subscription model. I can't make that my B2C SaaS tool. I got to come up with something else. And now the work is, where are the things that ChatGPT can't do or can't do well, that needs that personal touch from folks like me and you and others in the community? Because and even as the ambassadors, we thought no one's gonna call us anymore for office hours. This thing is super easy to use. We're booked for like weeks. We're at capacity. I look at my calendar, all my office hours are booked up. So there's still, I don't know, I can't explain it, but there's still some room for like expertise. Because even still with ChatGPT out there, people are still booking time with us to learn how to use ChatGPT. And what do I tell them? Just go like this, bang the keyboard, and something's going to come out.
Yeah. And by the way, so for people who are missing the context here, so from the beginning, because Abran is an official OpenAI ambassador, all the OpenAI ambassadors, as a part of the OpenAI community, as a user, you can just sign up for office hours, and so you could meet with Abran. Sounds like he's booked up, but eventually you can meet with him, and they can help you with various issues, whether it's commercialization, giving you feedback, and a lot of it, from my understanding, has been just like prompt therapy, like giving you advice on like how to like change your prompt up to get the most out of GPT-3 and stuff like that. Collaborations as well are another area, and between the ambassadors, I'd say they're all pretty interdisciplinary. But I would say like Vlad is definitely on the artist end. Yes. Like if you're an artist, you want to chat. They all have different areas of expertise, right? And so that's also really nice and helpful. It's a great resource that I've tried to plug on Twitter. We plugged before on the podcast, but I definitely recommend it. Like it's unbelievable that you can just book a meeting with someone like Abran, and you all should take advantage of it. Sorry to book up your calendar for another 6 months, Abran.
Yeah,
but
no, it's all good. That's why we're here.
Yeah, but so this question of just relevance and soul searching and FOMO, like, it's just fascinating, right? Like, so Riley Goodside, who does a lot of these amazing prompts for GPT-3 on Twitter, like he's found all these crazy things that it can do. He's invented new techniques via prompt design. He tweeted yesterday that, he's sick of ChatGPT. Like he misses the prompt. He misses being his hands dirty, kind of like you're describing with the controls on the right. So he's thinking that way. There's maybe startups that are like, okay, ChatGPT probably does what I do. Now I need to adapt. On the media end, there's just like, wow, there's like all these new faces, and they all showed up overnight.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this stuff used to be so niche. It used to be so like, I would put out a video and most people
TikTok,
have seen
bro.
it.
Don't go to TikTok. I'm telling you.
Yeah,
it's depressing. You're
it's
going to be
nuts,
like,
right?
How did they get 2 million views and they learned this yesterday? And I've been doing this for years and losing sleep.
And you see them go through similar motions of it, right? Like they learn what prompt design is, they learn what prompt engineering is. They don't think it's the best name.
Yeah.
Right.
None of the product.
They start like, they're sort of like going through the same things. Like, what are the use cases? How can I make money? Like all these classic, almost, it's like a rite of passage, some of these kinds of questions, right? Now, on my end, like I'm cool, like in the sense that I like the more the merrier. I like competition. I want to get better. At the same time, like for what I do, a lot of it is based on my perspective as well as my own projects. So a lot of people are tuning in, not just for updates on OpenAI or these things. I feel a lot of people tune in to hear what I think about it, right? And also just my ideas, especially around what's next. I think that is an area where hopefully I have somewhat of a unique advantage compared to most people, because I do spend a lot of time thinking about it, probably way more than the average person. And also, like, I don't know, like, I don't really run a lot of this stuff, like, kind of like you, like, I run this as a volunteer. Like, I don't really make money. If anything, it's quite time consuming. Yeah. I lose money from all of this. But I do like putting it out there. I've had some great life experiences as a result of the volunteerism that I do here. And I like the scale of it. You know, I put out a video and thousands, tens of thousands of really specific people see it who are creating things. Just to be a part of their journey is quite rewarding to me. And so, I don't know, I will just see myself doing it and continue to do it no matter how many other people there are, right? But the thing is,
I feel like VCs are also kind of accountable because they're always harping on, like, what's your moat? What's your differentiator? How do you make sure that no one else is doing this? I'm like, you can't. Why can't we just all coexist? Why can't, like, when you go to the candy store, is there one chocolate bar? No, there's like thousands of different selections. You know, there's not even one social media platform. There's not even one TV channel. There's thousands. So, like, if someone's raising money for a TV channel, what the hell is their moat? Nothing. Like, there's more TV to watch. You know what I mean? Like, there's enough people out there to capture your market and exist just fine, even if it's in ChatGPT. And a lot of people now are saying a lot now is going on the user experience, right? So, like, if the AI is the equalizer and there's going to be other ways to get this output, then what's the front end? What's the user experience? What's the user interface? And sure enough, what got ChatGPT to this point of virality was their user interface. It's really no different than GPT-3 is just the user experience is so much easier, so much cleaner and so much better. And I could put it in dark mode.
Yeah. And so, by the way, this has been a very interesting topic from the beginning, what Abran's describing, right? It's if everyone can build off of GPT-3 or 3.5 or whatever, and you build a business around it, like an app or something, how do you know somebody else won't just build the same business and compete with you? And they're using the same underlying technology. What's the differentiator? So in 2020, I wrote an article. You could check it out. It's like how to build a GPT-3 startup monopoly. The article kind of has a lot of folklore around it at this point. It's really long, like super long. Your eyes will bleed reading it, kind of like a lot of my articles. But I propose 20 techniques around it, on how you can sort of go around it. UI is one of them, like just great design. Great design, something really leading and stuff like that. But it is still yet to be seen, right? All these startups that have raised money that run on GPT-3, we'll find out how they're doing, how they did. I still think it's possible. Yeah. And
it's still early.
It's not just early. I come from the philosophy that everybody can eat. So not only do I like competition, I like the belief that everybody can eat, and I think everybody benefits too. Like more people jumping into media only benefits me. Yeah. Right.
You may say I'm gonna get a charger.
Okay, no problem. And we're back. We are charged up. Okay, excellent. So yeah, I was just saying that. Like it's everything is. It's just the beginning. Every year I say the same thing. It's just the beginning. It's just the beginning. We're just, you know what I mean? And yeah, like there's just so many things going on, right? Between DALL-E and Codex and this, like I just cannot even keep. So the main thing is I can't even keep track anymore of everything that's going on. Like, and it's been like this all of this year.
But because I've navigated so many different industries, my hip hop stage name was Ironic. Right, like I always liked being the irony in the room or the contrast. So when I was in high level like academic spaces, I was the hip hop guy. When I was in the hip hop spaces, I was the nerd, the high intellect. You know, and when you're around your similars, nothing seems impressive, and that's what me and you at fault for our own fault. Right? Like we're in this room of like other AI people and nothing we create is going to be impressive to them because they're trying to outdo us. Right. But what I found as a niche market is going to people who have never heard of any of this stuff. who just still see the magic of what I've presented to them and want to buy that magic because they're not on Twitter till 4 a.m. looking at other people's ChatGPT outputs. They're marketers. They're brand ambassadors. They're people who are running businesses that just need to improve their productivity and be more efficient. And they don't have time to learn about AI. This was my busiest year speaking ever. And most of the speaking engagements, the main stage time that I had with like Clara was like, tell us how to future ready our product or our business and tell us about AI. And I'm the only AI guy in the room. So I get a lot of business out of that because they don't know anybody else who are doing AI prompt design like I am. So there's enough spaces out there where you could be the only one that's holding the magic, the magic recipe for their business. But don't bang your head going into a space that's crowded with everyone else that's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah. And obviously, as the AI models improve, there will be new capabilities. And so it's the same game as 2020. If you can find some use case and build a startup around it that is successful, you're really monetizing, and you're gonna probably grow really fast and be successful, right? So I think a lot of it is also like the game is absolutely beginning, and you got to keep your eyes peeled. You got to keep a fresh mind. You got to look for opportunities. You got to hustle, and like, yeah, you're right. Like I've also had so many more people reach out to me this year, and this year, like I didn't have to explain what a prompt was. Like it's such a relief. Like there's some things which are like really spreading and quite pervasive now that it wasn't the case. Like last year, we wouldn't have any significant conversations because half of the convo would be prompts. What's a prompt? And then how do I get access to GPT-3?
Yes.
Right. And like, we're in a different place now. So you mentioned that ChatGPT, potentially if they add in the capability to browse the web. I heard rumors about this too. I don't know if it's true. I agree with you that it's going to be a crazy game changer, especially to Google and stuff. So just explain this to people who may not know. Earlier this year, OpenAI put out a research paper called WebGPT. And so WebGPT it was a separate model. They never released it, blah, blah, blah. It uses Bing, and it basically looks up the information on Bing and then summarizes the information on Bing into like a crisp answer. And it even does citations as well. So it will even cite the different links that it used and stuff like that and summarize it in this really crisp way. So anyways, it's very exciting if like, and just thinking about where ChatGPT could be going. I wouldn't be surprised if they haven't, if they've disabled the web browsing for now for safety reasons, and perhaps maybe they might start rolling out the web browsing capabilities maybe next year. And I don't know if this is true. I don't know if it's built in. It seems to me the way ChatGPT is, it's what I'm sort of calling an Easter egg product. I sort of feel like there's all these Easter eggs in it that we don't know about, right? And perhaps web browsing, when they enable it, may be one of those Easter eggs.
Or, what they call with like, electric cars, like over the air updates to your smart devices. Like it just might show up one day. I can't speak to like the roadmap of, WebGPT, going live and at scale, but I've been testing models, not web, but, chat, DALL-E, GP, months, years before they're released. And I bet you a lot of that time, especially with DALL-E, was spent on safety, and even if it was capable by this point, this runway before it gets actually released is all just like safety and thinking about what could go wrong if we release this to the public, and especially web. Personally, I'm not a fan yet of the idea because it's essentially a web scrape that then also needs the same refining that I have to do manually when I'm doing a Google search, right? So it's going to search those things. Is it the best? Now, Embed and semantic search does some great things with GPT-3 around like ranking and valuing the best results based on the context of what you're trying to do. If all that is baked in there, it's going to be way better than my search results. Because it's also not looking for the domain ranking or page ranking. It's looking for the relevance. It's looking for relevance and context. That alone is going to be big. I'm moderately excited for it, but like I said, I still like doing it the manual way of like, give me a data set that I trust, and then I'll do some really interesting things with GPT-3 based on this knowledge base that I know really well and that I know is within the safety parameters that I need to be for this output.
Yeah, you're right. So I hadn't even considered that. Like the absolute risks of getting stuff from the web. And like you even described that search result about the late Martin Luther King, right? And obviously it's problematic. Like maybe ChatGPT wouldn't have done that on its own, and then it looked it up on the web, and then it sort of does something like that, right? So there's absolutely risk there. I hadn't even considered that.
What if it summarizes all of page 1? You know what I mean? Like in the page 1 of rankings, it summarizes everything that it's found on page 1, including the bad shit. And like that's a thing. Like I'm sure these what if moments, and I hope they're taking notes while I'm talking right now because I'm sounding pretty cool. But these are things that we bring up in our meetings with them of like, have you thought about this? What about that? And it takes talking to the community to think about the ethics too. And I'm just glad that they're open to listen. I mean, I can't get Google on the phone to tell them about something. I have gripes with Google, mainly because I'm a parent of 4 and their UI around YouTube Kids and just YouTube in general is problematic. I need to be able to get to a point, and I know this is like a tangent, where like my 3-year-old, I can just pick the 2 or 3 channels that I want her to watch. Right now, it's a fed algorithm of what they're recommending. And if WebGPT is working similarly of like, it can only process what it's being recommended to it by Google or by the search engine, that's going to be problematic. You know what I mean? You can't custom tailor what you're getting out of Google, and that dynamic, and also that partnership, that's going to be a monster of a partnership if they not just do a web API scrape of like a Bing, but they partner at the leadership level with a Google or a Microsoft,
These are amazing points, and I 100% agree with you. Safety has definitely been something this year, which there was a lot of moments where I did speak out about my own safety concerns very publicly, and it's one of those things that I think as a platform I haven't done that great of a job. I think I've always cared about safety, but I haven't done enough, I feel sometimes, just even talking about it on the podcast. And like, I was going to announce it at some point, either on Twitter or whatever, but anybody in the future who's going to pitch me about their GPT-3 startup or idea, you're welcome to pitch me, but I want you to spend the first 30 minutes talking about safety. Like, I want to hear safety first. And to be absolutely clear to all the listeners out there, this platform is safety first. I care about safety. I want to hear about safety. I don't want any nonsense. And I'm not messing around. And I think one of the reasons I like talking about OpenAI so much is I also think it's good for the soul in the way that I don't feel like this is a company trying to do bad, that is, being negligent, that is, making egregious errors that are dangerous to society. And for a lot of new listeners, it might not be apparent to you, but AI is like Abran and I have been discussing, it's dual use. So on one hand, you can get all these benefits and you're saving time, you might be making money, it's making you smarter, it's doing stuff for you, tremendously beneficial. But on the other hand, the risks and dangers of AI are just as great, if not greater, right? And AI goes all the way to an existential risk level. So it could affect everybody's safety. And so, like, again, to be clear, and this is why I love Abran, just as a mentor and a role model in the community. Safety first. And it's really good to hear that you pass on this kind of feedback as well.
Blame me. You know what I mean? Like, don't blame the system. Don't blame the tool. Like when a dictatorship or like a tyrannical government makes propaganda media, no one's blaming Final Cut Pro. No one's blaming Photoshop. You know what I mean? Like the inception of that concept of that, the misuse and the misinformation are the bad actors behind it. And yes, they found a way to use the tool for that, right? But you can't expect that every tool has these safeguards baked into it, because at some point, if you have too many safeguards, it's going to take away the creativity and the tools that are there for the creativity. So I get the folks with the clones and, the stable diffusions and the mid journeys of the world that are like, there's too many restrictions around DALL-E. Come over across the street where we have less restrictions. All right, well, you're going to get something over there too that you weren't expecting, like DALL-E Mini, which I can't stand. You know what I mean? Because of the violent outputs that I've seen with that, the not safe for work, AI discords from using those engines, and like those things you're just not going to get from DALL-E, and I respect that.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with you. Again, it's dual use. Different people are trying to accomplish different things. I think all I'm just saying for my platform is safety first. And I just want to make it clear for anybody pitching me, who wants to partner me, work with me, wants me to promote their stuff. The way to my heart, to be absolutely clear, is safety. If you're launching some kind of OpenAI competitor, you want me to promote you, you want me to try your tool, you better be talking about safety for 30 minutes straight before you tell me about anything else, because I like it. I prefer safe tools that, at least, especially companies trying to be safe. And I love hearing what they're doing, what are they baking in and stuff like that. But that's me. That's my preference. Anyway, so the web browsing, going back to that, if ChatGPT can do it, I guess all I'm saying is, I think the main benefit of it may perhaps be current information, right? To be able to look stuff up and understand what happened. Mm-hmm. But I also think maybe there is a way where it helps with misinformation or hallucinating information, like all these other problems where maybe it can look up stuff and determine if it's making something up. And I don't know at a technical level if that's even possible, but I just think that might be another benefit and maybe the direction where it's heading. You mentioned formatting. I love the formatting in ChatGPT, right? Like I think like getting like a nice numbered list, a code block, like it's like it can make a table. Like all these things are just nice. And these are things we didn't have in 2020 up until earlier this year. And now like, it's like, man, I wish we had that all along, because it's just visually just so nice to use. And it's one of the simple things. Like so many products have markdown support, and it's a simple thing that has a tremendous amount of impact. I'm sure a lot of work went into it. The direction though, going back to the original question of where we think ChatGPT is going, I think it's heading towards like an everything everywhere encyclopedia. Like I think ChatGPT may well become like any question you ask it, it might become like Wikipedia. Like you'll have a Wikipedia article like answer with citations. It's got, different formatting and stuff. And now there's risks. Like clearly the OpenAI CEO said, you shouldn't trust it and all these other things. But I think the formatting is a pretty big giveaway on where this could be going. And obviously, I don't think they could ever call it an encyclopedia. I think something more casual like an assistant is maybe better. But to me, sometimes it feels like an encyclopedia, like that level of cohesiveness and simplicity, summarization, just as a knowledge tool.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not using it, and I know the education use case is a hot button topic because of the, potential cheating and everything else, but I think that's a very binary way to look at it, and I think we need to evolve how we teach, how we measure knowledge assessments, how we think about assessment, how we think about knowledge checks and retention of information, and whether or not ChatGPT is helping that, right? It might not jive with your current format, but if it isn't all-knowing encyclopedia, you can't really prevent a kid from using it for that purpose as they're studying or as they get ready for a test. They might not be allowed to bring the calculator into the exam, the same with ChatGPT, but it is going to find very unique ways. The same way that I knew I learned a very specific way. Talk to me straight. Talk to me like it's slang. Talk to me in metaphors and analogies, and I'll understand anything, and even quantum entanglement. So that's a huge benefit for education across the board for everyone to use it in that way. But we just have to revisit like what's more important, that this kid wrote this essay with no support, or they understand the concepts within the essay. That's a juncture that we're still going to struggle with. I actually have to do a panel with like an NYU professor like a debate on ChatGPT in a couple weeks. So that's going to be interesting because college professors are having a whole lot of fun with ChatGPT right now. I don't envy them at all. But it's disrupting a lot of spaces, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of adjustments next year.
Yeah, and this is also one of those things. I had an article last year in 2021. It was my big prediction that GPT-3 is going to take over schools and campuses. I said high school and above. And it turned out, I was saying it, nobody else called it, nobody else was saying it. It turned out this has actually happened now.
This is the moment.
This is the moment. It's definitely a turning point. It's exciting to see one of my predictions so early on pan out. I'll call this one a nice three-pointer. But do you have any advice? Like, you used to be a teacher, and also as a parent, could you speak, or what advice would you give to teachers about ChatGPT and what it means, and also how do you incorporate DALL-E, Codex, ChatGPT into your role as a parent?
That's a good one. We've definitely generated some interesting AI outputs from not only DALL-E but a couple different systems, and they've tinkered with, like, can you upload your own picture or not? That feature. And when they did, I was giving my daughters butterfly wings. I was putting them in pictures with dinosaurs and having them ride unicorns, like putting them in visual environments that they've never seen themselves in without having to be a Photoshop expert, right? Or an After Effects expert. And they love that. So that from an artistic standpoint, there's a lot that you could do there. There's a lot that kids can do to feel proud in what their output is. As a middle school teacher, kids struggle with confidence, and it is a sad situation where a lot of kids don't want to participate in the arts because they're just not confident in their output from an artistic standpoint. And I think my son even deals with that even on his own, where, like, early on he wasn't confident in his letters, he wasn't confident in the pictures that he was drawing, but he had this vision of what he wanted to get out of it. You put this machine in front of him now, and now the output will be exactly as how he envisioned it. And I think going back to, like, education, and for context, my master's was in education, my PhD was in education. A lot of it has to do with learning how to learn, knowing how do you survive industry shifting by teaching yourself the best way that you know how to learn, being pivotal. I used to say, you have to reinvent yourself every 5 years or upskill yourself every 5 years. Now it's like 2.5, 3 years, where, like, there's all these new tools, and, like, all right, well, what are you going to do? You're going to sit around and let other people master that tool, or are you going to upskill yourself? And I think as an educator, what's more important? Is it more important that they did the work, and they did the work the old fashioned way, or that they feel more comfortable with the concept and consuming that knowledge because it's being delivered in a way with ChatGPT that they can relate with, right? You could easily have kids right now say, all right, explain to me species, the biology of species in science with Pokemon. And that is exactly what I did with New School. Like, I would create these lessons by hand or with a freelance team of educators. They were like, look, this kid doesn't get this concept, so use this as the crutch, as the student-centered learning, activator to help them get to this concept. So we did, like, the economics of the sneaker game. We did, like, the parabolic arch of Steph Curry's three-point shot, right? So now you don't need a team of educators writing these lessons from scratch. You can go to ChatGPT and be like, look, I need to understand this science concept or this math concept, but just break it down in a way that I understand. I like X, Y, and Z. So if anything that you give me back has to be related in a way that I understand or that is important to me. That's huge for teachers. And they should embrace this tool for that opportunity and not look at it as like they're just going to cheat. Make a better test. Make a more creative test. Go to ChatGPT and be like, make me a creative test that kids can't cheat on. You use it against them.
Yeah, these are all just amazing points. I think it could be incorporated in the classroom. It could maybe, aid the teacher in the lessons as well. Like, say the students still don't get it. The teacher punches it in to ChatGPT in real time, and you can get an idea. Like, essentially, like, every student can get a personalized explanation. in a way that benefits with them. And you can just keep going. Explain like I'm in high school, explain like I'm in middle school, explain like, and you can ask follow-up questions. You can be like, what am I missing here? Right? Like you can ask
you just say point blank, I don't get it. I don't get it. It's like, all right, well, we'll try it this way. And you just keep saying, I still don't get it. And it'll try it another way. Right. And that's
where we're
what
at now.
the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, damn, these guys got it. Like these guys nailed it with ChatGPT. Like the potential is, we still haven't seen the full potential, but just the things that we're spitballing here is like, man, I wish I was a student right now.
Yeah, no, totally. And of course, like I probably should have said congratulations to the team at OpenAI. This is a huge achievement. It's incredible. But I thought it's kind of a given that this is like a slam dunk. I think maybe some of the hesitations I have with ChatGPT in education is, especially I think as a learning tool while you're learning, incredible. In the classroom resource, incredible. I think it is actually a very good teaching tool on thinking critically and adversarially, because you can't trust everything it says, right? So it's a good exercise for students on not everything that an AI says is actually true. And so here's how you can validate and cross-reference and see for yourself and find some truth there. I think it's mainly on the writing side. So I think the learning, reading, explaining, that it's valuable. It's the writing side. And sometimes I'm starting to feel really bad for a lot of these teachers. There's probably a fair amount of English teachers who are reading essays which were written by an AI. It may not even be ChatGPT. I could say just broadly, some kind of language model. And I think maybe there's some hesitation and something problematic about that, right? And, these tools have been around for a while. So like I mentioned in my article, there's a tool called Quillbot, an AI writer, which these kids were using even before GPT-3, like people found out about it or they got access. And a lot of them will help you reword it. So you can just pass the plagiarism checker, even if it's not writing it. It can help you reword, move some words around and stuff like that. And so I think that part, like I'm a little bit hesitant, and I in my article, I mentioned maybe there's fundamental questions in education that need to be addressed, right? So I argued that maybe it's not about writing the format of the essay. It's about writing the best essay with the best story, something that could even win an award, right? Maybe that's what we want to emphasize more in school rather than the format, because now we know that AI can do at least some of that work.
Well, the world that they're going into is going to be, hey, newsflash, folks that are working 9 to 5s, where you're teaching them this skill set to get that important job, are using ChatGPT to write their reports at their job. So this might be that one of those junctures where like we might still be trying to teach to an old skill set instead of just evolving with the skill set, because they're going to be using ChatGPT to write for them at work, and they already are. I mean, I've used it, and I know plenty of people that are like, I got to write this press release. No, I'm not. ChatGPT is going to write it, right? But from a plagiarism standpoint, I'm sure if it's not already a model or a SaaS tool or something that's already baked into ChatGPT, you upload that student's or copy and paste that student's essay, and you say exactly to ChatGPT, in your best estimation, tell me if you feel like this essay was plagiarized with just some slight rephrasing, right? And then let ChatGPT give you an output and see what it comes out with. It might say, for the most part, this is plagiarism minus a few sentence starters and an original paragraph. So you might use the cheating against itself and with the same technology, which I definitely think, if it's not a tool, should be. And I think some people even, you're going to see at the policy level, folks are going to try and find signatures in AI outputted media content copy. That's also a rat race, because as soon as you put something out that can track outputs from 3.5, 4 is going to come out. And then you need to come out with a tool that tracks 4 outputs, and then 4.5 comes out. So every time you try and come out with something that can see if there's a watermark or a signature, and if this was created by AI, a more sophisticated AI engine is going to come out, and then you're back starting from scratch.
Yeah. And it's there's that problem. I think it's, what's best for the student, what makes sense for the future. I think different schools will have different policies. So some schools, maybe our essays are in person only now. Pencil and paper, baby. Like, we are back in the past. We're pioneer ages. Other schools may embrace it, and they'll be like, look, like, we might have an in-person test just to make sure you know the format. After that, we want you to come up with an essay that really is based on a personal story of you, and it's more about you and your story and what you learned throughout your life. You could be a refugee, something like that, right? That might be another approach where it's, we take advantage of these tools and we push for like high levels of quality, high levels of storytelling, much higher than we used to, right? Or maybe everybody is guaranteed at least a 70 with ChatGPT, right? There's gonna be different approaches. There may be regulatory approaches. We're not sure. And this is one of those things, I sort of tweeted about it a few months ago, but I would like to hear from OpenAI about the policies around education. What's the plan here? What's the plan? Legal and policy team, how do you guys think about it? Do you have any advice for educators? What are you actively doing around this issue? And, like, what is the role between company and school board and government here? Right. And what makes sense for the future? And how can maybe there's a role where OpenAI can help schools prepare for the future because they're so.
But what's preventing you from making an essay in Copy AI or in Jasper? Like, even if it doesn't come from ChatGPT, there's other AI tools out there in the market that can copyright something for you from concept, or from a topic. And I think we need to hone in on, I would love to speak with, I will be a professor in a couple of weeks, of like, what are you actually gaining from writing that essay? What knowledge or what skill is being gained from it? Is it just the transfer of the idea conveyed through an essay, or is it being able to craft my ideas and put my ideas together in a cohesive thought? Like, what are the things that might be lost or sacrificed with AI, and if it's worth it? Because they thought sacrificing cursive was worth it. They thought sacrificing woodshop in school was worth it. And there's a lot of people now that miss those woodshop skills, right? Was that the right decision? So as we evolve, whether it's AI or not, there's going to be an evolution of skills that we need for society, and some rigid, K-12 skills or higher ed skills might not make it into the next rotation. Into the next set of skills that we might need for society. But we've seen this. I mean, when my PhD, I've been talking about this since like 2010. When you think about the books that like Daniel Pink wrote, and there's so many people that were, the 21st century skills, the 4 C's, they call it. So they were like, anything beyond the 4 C's is likely going to be automated. If you're doing a job that's like if then, you got to get away from it because it's going to get automated soon. So make sure that you're focusing on the 4 C's. And then schools got hip to that, and they're like, all right, we have to add the 4 C's. And the 4 C's are communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity. And let's focus on that instead of the outputs, because the outputs, either they're going to be automated at the job level, or there's going to be a tool that's going to automate at the student level. And here we are.
Yeah, no, the parallels to cursive, even calculators might have been controversial at one point. All these things we take for granted. Computers, like every new technology requires new school board policy. Phones required it was a whole new can of worms for the school boards. Mm-hmm. I just think, AI is sort of in a class of its own. I think it's quite revolutionary, probably disproportionately so. And I'm not blaming OpenAI. Like, I don't necessarily think they're responsible. Like, there's probably others, it's in some sense it's inevitable. I just think some guidance here is needed, because in the meantime, all these schools have these students, right, who may not be getting good quality outcomes, and they may be getting into universities having perhaps never learned a skill, and maybe the university's not ready. So in the meantime, while there's all these students that you're responsible for, I think there needs to be some leadership here from someone, right? That is both industry as well as on the school board side. And a lot of teachers may not be even aware, on what to even look for if something is AI generated, like something. And it gets complicated because when I wrote my article last year predicting that schools will see this influx, and I wrote, and at the time, I think I wrote it's exciting because I think, we may get a real revolutionized education system, and it may be student led, right? Yeah. Where the students will say, what's the point? You're wasting our time. Teach us something that's actually valuable. But at the time when I looked it up, it gets complicated because at the time, I think OpenAI's policy was 18 plus, that you weren't even supposed to be using GPT-3. And so in that way, at least it's hopefully like university and above, maybe like grade 12 high school. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's really complicated, and I guess we'll see, right? Who's gonna step up here, or who's gonna put out anything, any kind of help. I don't know if teachers are like very, very gravely concerned, or if there's some teachers that are very excited about it. Part of the thing is I've been out of school so long, so I both don't know the student perspective and I don't know the teacher perspective, right? Yeah. Some teachers could be like, I don't care at all, and this is great, right? Like I didn't, you know what I mean? Other teachers could be like, especially for English, like, maybe they feel like something is lost here that is essential, right?
But it might bring back, it might bring back this art form, which what we're doing right now is public speaking and being able to articulate ideas instead of relying on writing them. Because if you can get the output of the writing done instantly in 3 seconds, you still need to convey that idea. And I'm sure professors and teachers don't mind not having to read, dozens of essays poorly written every week to sit there with the red pen, because that is also traumatic. The redlining of all these, papers for students. So now we might go back to rhetoric. We might go back to being, an orator and speaking to your idea, because most of these kids, my 7-year-old son is aspiring to be a YouTuber. Most folks want to be you, Bax. I don't know if you know this, but kids nowadays, they don't want to live your life. And they want to get to a point where they can speak fluently, share ideas, be confident, be, charismatic on camera about heavy, heavy topics. And the teacher might have to flip the script on the assignment and be like, okay, mess around with ChatGPT all you want. You're not writing an essay for me. You're going to stand in front of class and give a half-hour verbal presentation. No slides, because there's AIs that produce slides. No presentations, no infographics. Just you and your ideas in front of the class. So how about that?
No, it's a great.
You're going to be tripped up.
Point. Yeah, I think like it's, this could be the straw that completely reforms education as we know it. Completely different classrooms, completely different goals. They might get rid of grades. Like, who knows how far this discussion goes.
That's how education started, was to speak to one another. You know what I mean? Was the griots of Africa and everything else of like, I'm going to share a history verbally, and then you're going to pass that down. You know what I mean? And the more you tell it, the more it becomes ingrained in you.
Yeah. That is, I didn't know that. That's super interesting. I think it's going to require some kind of model level change to the whole system. And I think we'll see some experimentation next year. I think different school boards will try different things. Anyways, so thank you for sharing your thoughts as both a teacher as well as a parent. That's super awesome. This is going to be a little bit more inside baseball. So Peter Wander, who's the VP of product and partnerships at OpenAI, he put out an interesting tweet this week where he said, it's like the end of prompt engineering, say hello to dialogue engineering, or something like that. And like, you responded, I retweeted, and I think we know roughly where you stand on the whole thing, and they're not mutually exclusive either, right? Like, I think it's still both in a way, but what is dialogue engineering about? Like, did you want to explain that to me? What do you think he meant?
So I think there is going to be a unique style of prompting with ChatGPT, even though it's fully baked and kind of closed and automatic, right? Like, I'm sure the analogy here is like, I'm sure that there's drivers out there that know how to drift with an automatic car. The same way that I'm sure that there's people that drift with the car that's manual, and know how to work it, even though that there's less settings, right? There's less gears to mess with. There's less features. but can still get the best output. And the what they are making available to you is communicating to the system. Now, a lot of folks didn't like, especially the engineering community, didn't like communicating to GPT-3. They were, like I said before, they were looking for the commands. They were like, all right, I just want to write this half a sentence command. That's not even a sentence. It's like produce output. And I'm like, where's your prompt? And they're like, that's it. It says produce output. I'm like, how are you telling it what to do? And they're like, I'm not. And I'm like, let's start from the beginning. In the beginning, and this is what I was telling Peter, I was like, in all my office hour sessions, I would say, all right, tell the machine what you want it to do for the first 3 sentences. Go. And they're like, okay. They didn't have the communication skills to just say to the machine, I want you to do this. Today, we're going to do this. Thank you for working with me. Like, just be polite. We got to work with these machines. You don't want the matrix to happen, so be polite. So ChatGPT is not forced, but basically forced dialogue with the machine, where you just got to tell it. There are no commands. There's no instructs. There's no coding, structure. Just talk to the machine. Tell it exactly what you want it to do. And some folks are going to get real savvy. And some of the jailbreaks, you're starting to see the inklings of getting really savvy with this current setup. But there might be the next Abe that's like younger than me and says like, look, I don't need the playground at all because I can get ChatGPT to do everything I want with straight dialogue. And I'm learning that skill set. Anytime I mess around with it, I'm like, how far can I take this in my own mockups and my own demos before I feel like I need to go into the settings in GPT-3. But you're going to get masters of both crafts. But again, one is built on the other. It's like learning martial arts. Like someone might learn a new modern martial art with Bruce Lee. Like Bruce Lee's art form was like an amalgamation of his ideas and creativity that no one else practiced before him, but it borrowed and had influences from other things. They're all cousins, right? Like ChatGPT is a cousin of GPT-3. And that's why DALL-E and Codex are so good, is because they borrow from their cousin models, where like I was writing in Codex, I was prompting, write me for education a multiple choice test quiz, right? It created the format, as you said, with buttons that were for the multiple choice that were able to be populated and clicked. But the content of each of those questions, I was like, how does Codex know what content to put for a science question? It borrowed it from GPT-3, right? Codex, even though it was a coding generator, was getting the context of the communication from GPT-3. The same thing with DALL-E. And now with Homeboy, ChatGPT, you're going to see it borrow from you're going to see it generate code because it's borrowing from its homie across the street, Codex. You're going to see it produce long form, like you would in GPT-3. And then I'm sure the understanding, if not the image directly, the understanding of what prompt you need to set for DALL-E to get the perfect image of what you're describing in ChatGPT. So they're all going to be related, but there are going to be some savvy people that just don't leave ChatGPT at all.
But what do you think is the essence of dialogue engineering? Like what is the difference between dialogue engineering and prompt engineering? Is dialogue engineering even a thing? Like I haven't heard anybody even really use the word dialogue engineering. It could be my own visibility. I did hear back in the day people talking about dialogue engineering, perhaps with something like Alexa, right? Like those kinds of systems, right? The voice assistants. But what do you think is the essence of dialogue engineering, and how is it different from prompt engineering?
I think it's probably a cousin of instruct, where like you really have to explain yourself. You really have to be articulate, and you're starting to see that even get out of hand with like Midjourney and with DALL-E. More so Midjourney, where like people are going overboard with describing the exact detail of what they want in the picture. They'll write a paragraph of this shutter speed, this backdrop in the style of this photographer, cinematic, and it'll be a paragraph this big of like all these details of what they want captured in the picture. But I think with dialogue engineering, it's going to be more constructive. So you're going to have to like, all right, you describe this branch. Now describe how this complementary branch builds on this and they work cohesively together. But doing that in natural language is going to be hard for a lot of people. And newsflash, it's going to be hard for a lot of engineers that are making 6 figures, 7 figures. because they're so used to the coding language that they've given up maybe honing in their natural language. And a lot of these machines rely on natural language, even though I'm not a coder. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who are programmers that are like, no, it does just fine when I speak to it in code. And it's giving me exactly what I want when I speak to it in code. But you're going to find it's probably going to be a hybrid of like speaking to the layout, speaking to the wireframe, speaking to the infrastructure. And, you know, I'm also bullshitting here because I don't know. I'm not fully trained at all in like coding to know what the previous history was of dialogue engineering. I only know how that is relevant to GPT-3 in the playground, instructs, and also what I'm seeing now of people getting really savvy with it, with like, as you said, like a paragraph, even more so in describing exactly what they wanted to do and then following it up with the next step and the next step and the next step to build on each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And where I agree with you is like, I think prompt design is about imagination, you know, and like, I think last year I had a whole article where I found like, I basically argued like coding sort of restricts your imagination, and for all these different reasons, it makes you more like a computer. And so perhaps maybe the best prompt designers come from maybe creative writing or these other kinds of disciplines where, you know, their imagination is still quite strong. I all I can sort of assume if I was to explain the difference between prompt engineering and what we could be calling from now on dialogue engineering. I think prompt engineering is basically about like writing something that is exemplary, having the right examples so that you continue to get the results within a certain window that you want, right? So that was maybe what prompt engineering was, like sort of fooling the AI to do what you want, being clever, using imagination, all these things, getting it to play a character. And maybe dialogue engineering is, you're right, like maybe built off of prompt engineering, but maybe over time. It's on a longer time horizon, and there may be something about it where you sort of say one thing, you say the other, and then you hit it with a sucker punch, right? And that sucker punch may be dialogue engineering. It's sort of left field out of nowhere, but it gets you what you want, right? But again, like it's so new, it's so emerging, and I'm still looking for examples about it. And in many ways, sometimes I feel ChatGPT, because it's you know, this threaded conversation. I don't quite think the comparisons. It's hard to like compare it to some conversations to others. It's hard to like. It's not as much like GPT-3 where you just have here's the prompt, here's the outputs, and it kind of works for everybody. I think different people really do have different experiences with ChatGPT because there's just so many other ways this conversation could go.
And people were also trying to be minimal, which, you know, I understand, but I never fully understood with GPT-3, where they would ask like, I just want to do the prompt, what they call single shot, right? Like just one command and then that's it. But I never really shared what like the back end of Clara looks like. Every 4,000 of her tokens is like a stream of consciousness. And it's like a dialogue with her over years between myself and other, you know, folks from schools and the community that had a chance to speak with her. And it's just a flow. It's a dialogue flow between us and her that we've preserved over years. And everyone else that I have had office hours with GPT-3 are trying to do the opposite. They're trying to do everything in one command. So there isn't an opportunity for a dialogue, right? What you're talking about is like an ever evolving, like we're just going to keep going with this thread, and what it looks like 6 months from now is not going to be what it was day one, right? Because it's going to be iterating on the outputs, and my inputs are going to change based on your outputs, and we're just going to be feeding off of each other for like eternity, you know, depending on whatever you're trying to build with it.
I see what you're saying. So it's like an evolution. It's like a long-term evolution, and your system gets smarter over time. Yeah,
that is exactly what Clara is at this point, which is why, like, when people are like, oh, well, there's other AI bots, I'm like, not like Clara, because those bots didn't have these conversations with Clara over these last 2 years with those specific people in getting those specific outputs. So her answers and her ideas are going to be her own based on the evolving dialogue that she's had over, you know, the last 3 years.
I see. Okay. Awesome. So let's switch gears, and then I think we should be good to wrap up. So we talked about music and your background there. What are some of the broader parallels you've noticed with upcoming music stuff and just the whole GPT-3 all the way to DALL-E and ChatGPT, the different communities and the world? What are some of the parallel similarities?
So the juncture point. So I mentioned before that we kind of deserve this like FOMO moment, this anxiety that we're getting of like everyone is jumping into our room. But that's exactly how artists feel right now with AI art, right? So like we're getting a taste of our own medicine because we're over here, like our AI room is crowded and artists and AI art, I mean, right, traditional artists are like, who are all these AI guys in my room and in my space?
That's a great point.
And, you know, it is a juncture point that we all have to be okay with. Well, we all have to adapt to in some kind of way. We don't have to be okay with it. You don't have to be okay with nothing. But I saw this live when this happened with DJs in Serato. Like I was carrying crates for Master Flex and Cypher Sounds and these guys. And there was a point where folks were like, oh, you ain't gonna just bring a laptop? Nah, man, I'm a purist. I'm doing straight vinyl at this club. After a while, then that vinyl gets heavy, you know, and if you're just doing a wedding, is it really worth bringing 15 crates of vinyl to the club, you know, for like a live spin that you're going to dip out afterwards? So they started to pick and choose when they wanted to bring a laptop instead of the whole crate set of the original vinyl. And more they started to rely on the technology. And nowadays, no one brings vinyl anywhere, all right, unless they're doing it on purpose to be a traditionalist and a purist. And I still know vinyl DJs that still have Serato, and they all kind of make it work together, right? And even prior to that, go back 30 years before Serato, we had this with sampling in hip hop, where the traditional blues and jazz artists from the 60s and 70s and 80s, they were like, who are these knuckleheads from the hood taking pieces of my music? And back then it wasn't even like discreet. It was like they're just taking the whole song and rapping over it. And I can't even understand what they say. And there was a juncture there where like my mom even yelled at me. She was like, turn that ish off because it's just a redo of my favorite song. And, you know, I grew up in that moment of like, I'm appreciating the new version that incorporates this new enabling technology that the classic heads and the OGs just don't appreciate. So basically my warning is like, you know, we can easily fall into like OG syndrome, which is fine. Like if you want to be a purist, hold on to that for as long as you can, but don't hide if you feel like I can use both, right? There was an argument online around Rogan's post of AI art, around Alex Gray, and people were heated. Artists were heated. They were like, F Rogan, you know, he's promoting this work. Alex Gray's not even going to get any of the royalties off of this work if people start selling this like AI interpretive work, which is probably true. But what happens if Alex Gray turns around and starts making AI art, right? Like you're over here making this point for someone who hasn't even made a decision for themselves if they want to use AI art in their repertoire or not, and add it right next to their palette and their paintbrush. I was talking, one of our potential clients was a huge estate in Mobile, Alabama, of $1 billion estate of a famous Black artist, that we were showing them how we can, because he's no longer with us, make extensions of his art with AI, right? But sanctioned by the family and by the estate, right? In a way that honored his original work, but created new work based off of that. So there is room for that. There is room for new folks that don't know how to pick up a paintbrush, that are just so nice with it when it comes to AI art tools. And there are probably some amazing scriptwriters, and there are probably some amazing people with the pen when it comes to writing that are probably being stylized into ChatGPT, where someone's like, I want an essay written in the style of this person. I want a TED talk written, you know, performed in the style of this, you know, TED talk and TED speaker. And that's going to happen. But, you know, there was a juncture point just like this many times. And not to even, you know, I'm probably going to piss off some of my hip hop heads, but we didn't voluntarily offer royalties to the artists that we were sampling. Like, it came to the publishing houses to come to us and be like, yo, the song is great. It's charting. You got to give them a piece, right? And their lawyers are going to come after you, and we're going to have split sheets. And every time the song is performed, they're going to get a cut. Every time the song is played on the radio, they're going to get a cut. If you want a smaller cut, you got to replay that piece and not take the actual recording, because now the label gets a cut. So if you don't want the label to get a cut, you got to do something that's, interpolative or, compulsory. But we didn't volunteer that money over. People were trying to do the opposite. They were making these sample cuts. They were like this small and unrecognizable to get around those publishing houses of identifying where the sample came from. And now everything's digitized. So then there that went. You know what I mean? But I think you're also asking a lot of creatives to offer a lot of safety restrictions where they're just trying to be creative. That's not their job. Let the policies be made by policymakers. Let the creators create.
Absolutely. And there's definitely some element of rule breaking. There's some element of pushing everything forward. There's an element of growth. And if we don't grow in these moments, we just wouldn't have what we have today. Like, we have a whole genre, which everybody loves. And it's like, people grew up on it, swear by it. 100%. I agree with you. Very quickly, did you have any advice? So Stability AI has announced that they will be releasing a music generation model next year. Obviously, neither of us can comment if OpenAI has any plans of something of that sort. In the past, they've made Jukebox, which is a much older model that generates music. But imagine something which, lets you write a song with AI. Maybe you give it a prompt. Now, I don't know how these tools are going to work, like whether they'll be you write text and it generates a song. I think the music models will be more nuanced than that. But do you have any advice for next year about any aspiring music makers, anybody who maybe is into this stuff and knows they're going to want to try that stuff too?
You have every right to be upset by it. You have every right to pick and choose the things that trigger you, because for everyone, it's going to be different. For the artist right now, it's the AI generated art. They probably don't care as much about the AI generated copy. There was this, this AI artist that was really upset, and I looked up their bio and they were a digital sculptor. And I'm like, well, you're not a real chiseler with real sculpting anymore. You know what I mean? So you're using algorithms to make your current work. So there is digital, everyone is going to be okay with a certain digital integration, and everyone's going to be upset by a certain digital integration. For me personally, I think music might trigger me in some ways by the folks that I hold to a very high standard. So for instance, if I go out there, who knows, I could make a make your own rap verse AI tool that everyone could just mess around with tomorrow, because I probably already have the prompts for it. And I release it tomorrow. It's for everyone to have fun with, because there's a lot of kids that just want to come up with raps, that they want to hear songs that were never made, which is partly why I love AI art so much, is because you can then make songs that you've always wanted that just the collab never happened. These two artists never got into the studio. This artist died before their time, never got to collaborate with this producer. So now you can go and put those prompts in and make that AI music that you always wanted to hear for yourself. Now, if Kendrick Lamar turns around and starts making AI generated music, I'm going to have a problem, because there's a certain council of leaders in the space that I'm only a fan because you're a purist and you don't have ghostwriters. So for those who have a ghostwriter, your music is great for the club, it's great for the girls, but you're not going to be on my top 5 list, right? So I'm going to hold people on that top 5 list. The same with DJs. I love people who spin for weddings and clubs and make their money off of Serato. You're not going to be on the same list as the folks that do the DMC competitions every year, that are beat jugglers and turntablists. That's a completely different craft. And as a breakdancer, sidebar, I used to be a b-boy. You're always a b-boy for life. Shout out to Rocksteady and Full Circle. For those who do head spins for a wedding or head spins for a commercial, does not make you a b-boy. A b-boy understands the technique and the craft and everything else that comes along with it in the culture. But because you've mastered a head spin from your Taekwondo class, doesn't make you the same level of artist as someone who's mastered the craft. So I'm not putting myself on the same pedestal as Basquiat. I love Basquiat, but am I making some dope shit? Absolutely. And am I going to find an audience for my dope stuff? You betcha. But I'm not going to say I'm just as good as Basquiat. It's two different lanes. So I'm excited for AI music. I think they're going to get the same knock on the door. I won't say same, but they're going to get a knock on the door from the RIAA or whoever the head honchos are behind all the labels and the music rights, and be like, so you're going to try and take what music data, to feed it to what AI, and you need billions of our songs to do this? Yeah, that's not going to happen. They're going to politely be like, don't do that. Don't do that. And they have that power. No one's kind of pulled that. There's no like cohesive body representing art that way. There's no cohesive body representing text that way. But there is with music. It's represented by like 5 or 6 labels at the top that can say, yeah, you're not using our data that way.
Yeah, they can lobby as well, right? I 100% agree with you on that. I think it will be exciting. In my view, I'm excited. I don't quite know if music will be as big as DALL-E or Midjourney. I think music, people are a lot more selective. You can't just scroll a feed and like browse songs like in the way we consume images. But I think it will change the game forever. In fact, I think it's sort of the next evolution after sampling, right? Like,
but think about like make a Biggie Nipsey collab on a J Dilla beat. Could you imagine if you're typing that in?
That'd be incredible. It'd be exciting for everyone, and a lot of the big people in Hollywood have started using the AI art tools. At least tried them, right? Like the word gets out pretty quickly. I guess the original question was like more on the preparation side. So say you are right now, you maybe have used GPT-3, you're definitely using DALL-E or Midjourney or any of the image generators, Stable Diffusion, and you want to get ready for next year because Baxter Future says music is coming next year. That's his prediction. How do you get ready for the music models?
My answer stays the same because you have to, shout out to Spacecraft, who's an amazing artist that I know out there, where like he's doing some amazing stuff with AI art that I would say from an experimental standpoint, just to understand it. And every artist should be doing that. But he's doing it to prepare himself of like, how do I feel about this? You know what I mean? And like, if I go out there and make a bunch of music with AI and everyone comes after me, I have to be ready to establish how I feel about it and go out there for my own purposes on social media or panels like this and platforms like this and be like, you know what? I'm okay with it. Because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to generate stuff and people are going to look at it like unethically. And they're like, I didn't intend on any of that. I was just making stuff with AI. But think about now, like, what are the ethics around music with AI? What about, are you comfortable producing certain things but not other things? Does it rub you the wrong way? Like, is music crossing the line for you? And then get your ideas down now of like what you could potentially prompt and what you'd like to create, and then hit the ground running once it comes out to start experimenting with it. But then if you feel like, no, I'm going to be a music AI artist, like that's just going to be my jam, then you got to come ready with a script like this of like, I know how to defend it against the culture. I know how to speak to it and how it's complementary to the real music artists out there or traditional music artists. And I'm going to live here. And I guess I kind of have made that for myself at this point with GPT-3 and AI art of like, I'm here. I'm supporting of it. And I've established why I feel like it's okay to coexist with traditional forms. And I'm confident in my ability to navigate that space of what I feel like is inappropriate and what I feel like is okay. And I'm a big boy. I can handle the criticism.
Yeah. It's all great pointers. I would just add like, GPT-3 teaches you a lot. DALL-E teaches you a lot. Learn prompt design. Like try to work on your fundamentals. And that's sort of how you could prepare for music. I would maybe study chords. I would study a lot of the terminology like harmony, melody. I wouldn't be surprised if you want to know those things. I would want to know the basic structure of music, whether it's the time signatures, bars, phrasing. And more importantly, I think all this stuff, whether it's DALL-E or some music models, film stuff in the future, I think it helps to do some soul searching. What story do you want to tell? What makes you unique? In what ways has your life been challenging, traumatic, exciting? And how do you want to share that emotion and that story with the world? And the larger thing is all of these tools will allow you to tell that story. Definitely by the end of the decade, right? You will have these resources. You'll be able to spin up a movie, and the poster will be you'll be able to control exactly how you want that poster to look. You'll be able to control every scene in that movie, and speak to people, and then you can make the soundtrack perfect, right? So try to just think deeply about what great story you want to tell. And definitely, just like with DALL-E, it was helpful to have a little bit of art history, to know these kinds of things, to know the terminology. I would definitely say for the music stuff next year, it doesn't hurt. And I'm personally very excited to hear various people in the AI community drop some music, drop some mixtapes, drop the raps. We might even have some diss tracks next year. It's going to be so cringy, but also exciting.
I've gotten some bars out of ChatGPT. I definitely have.
You got some bars.
I have some ChatGPT bars.
Yeah.
That I put out there. It definitely has some bars for sure. They're not great. Yeah. They're not great. I'll work on it, but it's there.
We didn't get much time to talk about it. GPT-3 rhymes now. This is something that just is so crazy. It didn't used to do that. It can rhyme. It can actually rhyme now. And actually, I want to give a shout out to Vova. This is somebody who I've seen on Twitter. He's been playing with Jukebox. He's been playing with it for months now. Every good prompt designer I know has been playing with the music stuff and getting ready. They have stuff in the pocket ready to go. When I was soul searching, I did think about some stuff that I would think about, that I would maybe make some music about. I definitely feel like I have feelings that I struggle to articulate. So I look forward to the music models that will hopefully, give me the opportunity to articulate emotions, which obviously, even in this podcast, it's things that only music can convey. And no matter how much time I spent explaining my emotions, the music, you would listen and you'd feel it. You'd know where I'm coming from. And so anyways, that's just how I'm thinking about music models. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I understand we're over. I had 3 questions here. Shout out to Jake, Dexter, and Brian. I think we'll quickly just do 2 of them. I think some of these things we've already covered. So Jake was wondering, he's figuring out a rough estimate for the trajectory of AI advancement. What do you think people should be creating short term and in the midterm?
Solve your life problems, solve the problems of the community around you, solve the problems of people that are in your life that are struggling with things, and use them as case studies for potential use cases of can I come up with something with straight up GP or chat GP to solve their problems? And this is not something that you have to scale out widely. This is something that if you just get a small cohort of people that are dealing with this problem to make their life a little bit easier, do it now. Have that be your case study and be like, I produced a great experiment. Now, midterm / long term, come up with a list of things that maybe are limited in that you want to do that cannot be achieved currently, just like Bax just said about rhyming, right? So rhyming was like an aspirational prompt that we wanted from GP that we've been waiting around for years. And we never said to ourselves, it's just never going to be able to do it. We knew they'll have to figure some stuff out and eventually it might just pop up. And then it did, right? So there might be a wish list of prompts that are limited in these current states, but these things build on themselves every 6 months to a year, as we've seen. And one of the things on your wish list might become a reality.
That's great advice. I would just add, maybe at a technical level, if you want to understand this stuff on a technical side, I recommend you look up the OpenAI scaling law papers. And so this scaling law papers is sort of the kernel of all the advances we see with GPT-3 and all the different technologies. So you need to understand the scaling laws. That's what allows these new versions to be so much better. And also read the Instruct GPT research paper as well. That will help you understand how is OpenAI improving even within the same version of GPT-3. How are they making it better? And absolutely Abran's advice about looking around you. I absolutely agree. I think the best prompt designers throughout their entire day, they'd be like, I wonder if ChatGPT can do it. I wonder if GPT-3 can do it. And just by wondering and trying it, they discover all these use cases. They find all these ways to integrate it into their life. They get better at writing prompts. And then one other technical note as well. I recommend you check out, Google put out a research paper about their model called Lambda, which I think has even more parameters than GPT-3. In the research paper, they made this diagram of this like ballooning of activities. So as you scale up the model become better. Like these balloons emerge where it gets better at things like translation, new ones appear. And so if you're interested to sort of plan somehow at like a medium long term, the research is there. That should maybe give you some indication of the models as they improve medium term, what sort of opportunities could potentially be there for you to capitalize on. So we have one question. So sorry, Dexter. I think we're going to skip Dexter's question because we already talked a little bit about the music industry. He wanted to ask about Hollywood. I sort of touched upon films and screenplay. I sort of touched upon movie making and stuff like that. We can perhaps revisit this another time. Real quick ethical question from Brian. He had a few, so I'll try to get this question in. He wants to know, what do you think about the ethical impact of image transformers and where that will go? In what ways do image transformers reflect problems in our culture? And can they offer any solutions? And of course, Abran already mentioned earlier that, he doesn't speak for OpenAI. This is his personal opinion. So nobody wants him to get in any trouble. So go ahead, Abran.
I think we have to get past all the stuff that's already in there that might be fair use. Whether you agree with it or not, if it's in there in fair use, it's not for us to judge how it got in there because they got the permission. Right. So like, let's look at new stuff that could be fed to the system. Now, if you're looking at the fine print and, these models saying that, yes, whatever output you put in or whatever data you put in is going to be baked right into these models. And if you continue to agree to use that system, you are opting in. But I think there is an opportunity to create an economy around custom models or community-based models where like, we're going to create our own model with our own data that we volunteer to it and get a kickback and get a royalty for when the model is monetized and how much of my data is in there. I understood this concept when I had New School and I was selling lesson plans, a library, a catalog of lesson plans to lesson plan marketplaces. And they would say, okay, well, if you give us your entire New School catalog and it ends up making up 20% of our lesson catalog on the marketplace, then whatever subscribers pay to that marketplace, you get 20%. You're 20% of the content, you get 20% of the revenue. Now, I think the music industry try to mess around with this. We're like, out the gate, they take their 50% and the other 50% is left to the content creators to split amongst themselves. And whatever the distribution is of how much data, how much content you have in that system is what you get back. So then it incentivizes people to put more data into a system that they're earning money from. That is a potential model. But if there's stuff out there that you want to use, a lot of these AI gen apps, you're going to click that I agree to these terms. And the terms are usually, we're going to use the images that you output and just either not have it for fair use and for marketing. We're going to use it to bake back into the system.
Yeah. I think though the question was like, in what ways do the models reflect problems in our culture, and what's the solutions there? So maybe this is a question about bias, right?
Okay.
And stuff like that.
Whatever the bias is in society, whatever the slices you take from society, that bias is going to live in the data set. So if you think about Wikipedia pages, everyone is using Wikipedia pages for their models. 87% of Wikipedia pages are made by white males. So whatever bias lives in Wikipedia pages is going to live in your data set if you don't look for it and you look for the equity and how to address it in that data set.
There's for this, I would defer to the body of research that's out there. Many people look at bias. Often bias is technically benchmarked as well for language models and these things. It's nowhere near perfect or at that scale yet where we can definitively say anything at all. And also these problems are really challenging and complicated. I'll quickly say, at least with DALL-E, what they do in order to address the bias issue is in certain prompts, they interject different descriptions of diverse individuals. And so that way, when you type in programmer, for example, you may get somebody who's not a white, Asian, or brown male. That's what's going on at the DALL-E level. Stability AI is experimenting with this too. I think their whole ethos is, that people should have access to their model and spin up their own views on ethics, what they consider to be a diverse model. And, different countries could maybe have their own models that they feel represents them and their culture. But yeah, it's a really big topic.
That's the exact point, though, is that if you continue to rely on other people to represent your culture, it's never going to be exactly how you want your culture to be represented. Go build your own stuff and then represent your culture in a way that is reflective of you and your community in the way that it should be. But if you keep waiting on them to do it, it's never going to be done in the right way unless you make a lot of noise and you're involved in the process.
I'm a little bit optimistic. I think there are solutions that do work for most people and cultures and stuff, especially as these tools and communities get bigger. But yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I would defer to this whole ethics, regulatory. This is a big topic, and it's going to go on. This is a long term. These are big questions, long term, and we are going to hear from various experts as well, lawmakers, all these things going forward. Anyway, so thank you so much, Abran. You've been very generous with your time. Did you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, we covered so much.
I know, right?
I'm excited for the space. I do think that the other developers out there that have been in the space for a while do need a little bit of, don't worry about it. You still got an opportunity out there. Like, just be nimble. You know what I mean? And I did ask OpenAI directly. I'm like, am I out of the job? Like, is just ChatGPT that good that you don't need the Abes and the Brams of the world anymore? They're like, everyone in the world of AI, everyone just has to be flexible and be nimble and learn on your feet and adapt. So if you did have something that was kind of like just baked into ChatGPT, think about other ways that you could do it differently. Think about other ways that you can attack the market and be creative. Creativity is the number one source that'll help you get through all this space, whether you know how to use it or not. Just stay creative, think left out the box. And for the new folks that there's less of the barrier of like, I don't know how this interface works with GPT-3. So a lot of people just walked away from that blank canvas. But now don't walk away from this canvas. Just speak to it. Speak to it as you would anybody else. Watch a few sci-fi movies where there's AIs involved and talk to it the same way. And you'll be surprised what you get out.
I love that. My closing thought is not so much for the direct ChatGPT users, more so the people who've been around for a while. I think next year is going to be crazy. And I think every week we'll have something new. And one thing that was really interesting this year is it's like the same people as well as some new people coming into the fold, but they're all trying whatever's the latest and greatest, right? Everybody's trying Instruct GPT. DALL-E comes out, everybody's talking about DALL-E. Midjourney, people are talking about that. Midjourney version 4 came out 2 weeks ago. Everybody's talking about that. Stable Diffusion comes along. Everybody's talking about the ecosystem. My closing thought is I think next year there's this idea of mind share. Just this idea that the audience as well as the world only has so much mental capacity for one thing at a time. And so next year, we will just see a lot more competition for the attention of people into AI tools, as well as the world at large. Every week, I wouldn't be surprised if we have a new image model, video models coming in, music models coming in. And it's funny to see the same people. 1 week were artists. The week before that were poets, right? Next year, we may have a science model. I don't know. Next year, we might be scientists, right? And so I think the competitive dynamics are going to heat up. I think there will be more attention paid. There'll be more outreach. There'll be more competition for people's time and attention. I think companies like OpenAI will have to start marketing. I think they'll have to engage better with the community. I'm on record for sort of suggesting OpenAI should engage more with me. I feel quite left out in many ways, and I'm sure other people feel that way too. Next year, competition means you got to engage more. You got to reach that extra mile. And, this benefits the consumer at the end of the day, that there's going to be all these products and alternatives, and all these companies will be vying for you to use their tool. But anyways, that's just the big thing that I'm thinking about, for next year. And, especially with the music and movies and all this stuff, it's just going to be crazy. And let alone like even ChatGPT, we mentioned some of these Easter eggs, right? I didn't even get into one other thing that I had, which was that I have this hunch that ChatGPT has built in scratchpad capabilities, but we're not even going to touch on that yet. And
wow,
that might be also crazy. So anyways, we will call it here. Thanks so much, Abran, for joining us and being so generous with your time. We're over. And this is, of course, fan favorite of the podcast, returning regular, the champ. I really appreciate it. Always learn a lot. And so for the first time listeners, I imagine a lot of you have never tuned in my podcast before. Multimodal by Baxter Future is available on Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, everywhere. I have a newsletter, baxterfuture.substack.com, and you can find me on Twitter at BAKZTFuture. And it's the same for Instagram. And you know what? You can go ahead and follow me on GitHub as well. I don't know why you'd want to follow me, but I have the same handle everywhere. I have some more coverage coming up. The big thing I'm thinking about is my predictions for next year. I'll also be reviewing some of my predictions from this year, for this year as well. So that's where my mind's at. And then I'll probably upload a new video on matrix models, which I got to talk to you in the after show about, Abran,
nice.
if you have a few minutes. But anyways, that's it for today. Thanks so much, Abran. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Always have me back.
All right. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good day.
Peace out.
Bye.